I see Thomas all looking at the echo chamber. Or is that only me hearing that? I got new hearing aids, so it's really loud. Okay, we'll try it again. Good, thanks. We're calling to order the Land Use and Transportation Committee meeting. Okay, we'll try that and we'll go. And on my right is Councilmember McDaniel, Councilmember Tran, left Councilmember Walsh, Council President Kochmar, and we will now begin. Is there any public comment?
Like Susan's online.
Oh, and Susan, you're online? Good, thank you. And when you need to jump in, make sure you say something, because it's not always showing up.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any public comment? Okay, seeing none, any committee business anyone like to bring up before we start? Okay, let's go to item A, approval of the minutes of October 7th, 2024.
Mr. Chair, I move approval of minutes, October 7, 2024.
I second it.
Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, we'll go to item B, on-call asbestos abatement contract, project acceptance. Mr. Larson.
Good evening, Council. My name is Jared Larson. I'm the Operations Manager for the Public Works Department. Nope, that's the wrong one. Okay, I am here tonight for project acceptance for the on-call asbestos abatement contract. Policy question, should council accept the on-call asbestos abatement contract performed by Canway Abatement and Demolition LLC as complete? Project locations, so all of the work was done under this contract at the acquired properties for the new O&M facility that is currently being constructed. Project background, the city acquired 11 properties for the construction of the joint operations and maintenance facility. Hazardous material surveys identified asbestos-containing material in 7 of the homes. Prior to demolition, hazardous material needs to be properly removed. Canway Abatement performed asbestos abatement and removal on all 7 homes. And then preceding abatement, Public Works demolished and removed the remaining structures. Contract terms and funding, this contract was set up to not exceed $350,000. It was a 3-year contract with the option to extend for 1-year term. This is primarily funded and to date was solely funded under the Joint Operations Maintenance Facility project. Financial summary, of the 7 properties abated, the project totaled $176,193.03. Options considered, authorize acceptance of the on-call asbestos abatement contract performed by Canway Abatement and Demolition in the amount of $176,196.03 as complete, or do not authorize acceptance and provide direction to staff. Are there any questions?
Councilmember Walsh?
Yeah. Was this in line with what we anticipated it would be?
Correct.
Okay. All right.
Okay, seeing no other questions, do I have a motion?
Okay, so I move to forward option 1 to the November 19, 2024 consent agenda for approval.
I'll second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Thank you very much. We'll now move on to King County INET Customer Service Contract. Thomas.
Good evening, Chair Dovey, committee and council members. Give me a moment to bring this up here. Oh, that's why. Or not? Let's see here. All right. So before you is the King County INET Customer Services Contract for approval. The reason this is not my normal committee. I usually come to the Finance Economic Development Committee. And this is a reason that's being brought before LUTC is timing. I've got some out-of-office vacation, and we've got some other challenges with some partners that we're working on with this project that really we need to kind of move it up, move the timeline up so that way we can get things moving forward. One of the big things is, honestly, the fiber outages that we keep experiencing from Lumen and CenturyLink and Comcast, for that matter, that's affecting both ourselves as the city and also Federal Public Schools, our partners on this project, as well as South King Fire and Rescue. So overall, the goal for this project, we've been working on this for well over a year, kind of came from a conceptual idea to putting something on paper to understanding what logistics and a design to the point where we are right now, where we're moving forward with the project. So there's two parts to this project. We'll get to the second part at the end of this presentation. First part is for this particular contract that is before you to approve tonight. The goal was a redundant connection to the internet with geographic diverse paths and increased bandwidth. Our partners on this project are Federal Public Schools, South King Fire, King County INET, who is our current ISP, or provider of internet services for the city, and South King Fire. And also, we're leveraging the Community Connectivity Consortium, or the C3, because we're members of them, and they help strategically help agencies with these type of multi-jurisdictional projects. The Federal City Council, as part of the approved budget, has a $50,000 one-time in 2024 for equipment and setup and startup fees that's approved, as well as $25,000 ongoing. So ultimately, the diagram of what we're trying to achieve looks something like this. So the orange line on the right-hand side is what we currently have. So from Federal City Hall, Comcast, we connect to Comcast INET. They connect to King County INET, and then that gets us to the internet. The green line is what you're approving tonight. So everything on the green line, so our connection through Sabi Data Center in Tukwila, the Weston Building in Seattle, connects to King County INET, so we have a geographical redundant, diverse connection to INET, which is our primary provider. More on that later in the presentation. And we'll also have a secondary provider called NOAANET, and that's leveraging King County as well. So they're the one contractual entity that is making all of this possible. And then also what you see is our partners, Federal Public Schools and South King Fire. We have dark fiber that currently connects to this building that will get them access to this redundant connection up through the Sabi Data Center and Weston. So our current contract with King County INET is a little under $2,000 a month. We get a single connection via Comcast, 1 gigabit bandwidth, 64 public IP addresses that we use for people to access city services, some city services that we host here, secure DNS services, and connection to the IGN, or the Intergovernmental Network. That allows us to facilitate connection to the state agencies, AOC, as well as the Washington State Patrol to run names and plates for the public safety databases. The proposed contract is a little bit more than that, than what we're paying now. So it's just over $3,000 a month, plus a one-time setup fee of $1,500. So over a 5-year term, inclusive of tax and setup fee, we're looking at just under $220. But we get not only a single, but a geographically diverse, redundant connection, 2 gigabits of bandwidth, 64 public IP addresses, again, same thing, but also the NOAANET 2 gig connection and additional IP addresses on their service. So it really provides us a lot more options, and as we get further and further developed in technology, the more stuff we put into the cloud, the more we rely on, if somebody comes out and cuts a cable, we're in the dark. This gives us an option to help hedge against that, and additional bandwidth. So some additional information on this. I'll be bringing before you Community Connectivity Consortium Project Agreement 82. That'll be forthcoming. Effectively, that is just ratifying all the agencies. It's more designed to help just establish who's responsible for what. And like we are hosting equipment that's here in this data center, for example. We're leveraging a in-kind circuit that we received from Zayo to make this happen. So there's just, that identifies all of that stuff. In addition, there is some additional equipment that's not included in what you're approving tonight. Estimated at 19,000 one-time additional equipment. Some is shared, some is specific for our uses. $4,100 of equipment installation, and then another $800 ongoing for that support of the equipment that'll be here. And that's it.
Yes, Councilman Tran?
Thomas, can you go back to the picture that you show us where you have the yellow line and then the green line? Okay, so since I'm not a techie guy, so please help me to understand here. So currently, the yellow line is the one that we are using right now, right?
Yes,
Okay.
correct.
So if we have this green additional lines, does that mean that we can use both yellow and green at the same time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we will be using, let me rephrase that. So to get to King County INET, it's one or the other. So our primary link will be going over the yellow line, still as it has been, just with an increased amount of bandwidth. But our secondary ISP will be NOAANET. And so what I plan on doing with that is taking a lot of our Federal wireless traffic, so our free public Wi-Fi, and routing that over that network, getting it off of our primary business, leaving the King County INET for just strictly city business. So that kind of separates the traffic. And also I can increase the speeds on that network as well, because right now I can't do that. So that will help us, people that are renting space at the Performing Arts Center, the Community Center, Dumas Bay, in this building, they'll have a much more higher bandwidth connection for free under the Federal Wireless Network as well. So we will use both at the same time, but King County INET will be one or the other. And if one line fails, it'll automatically go over the next. And then our NOAANET is just over that one line. So it isn't geographically redundant, but it gives us a fallback.
Got it.
So
Thank you.
that helps, yeah.
Councilman Walsh?
Yeah, just kind of related, the recent outages that we have they been, were there, construction accidental things, or was it theft and vandalism?
So
cutting
far,
the
it's all
lines,
theft
or
and
what?
vandalism.
Theft and vandalism. Okay, all right.
I have a question if you have time.
Of course we have time. Go right ahead.
Will the fire department and the schools pay for this also?
So they have their own contracts with King County INET that they're approving, that they're paying for separately. That's not inclusive in this.
So we don't have to cover them?
We're not covering them. We're sharing a couple of our resources. Obviously, this building, this power that we're using in the data center, it's not a lot. But we're also, everybody is kind of sharing the city's Zayo connection that connects up to Sabey Data Center. So, but no, their service and everything that they are providing is on their own. We're sharing some assets, but we're not really paying anything additional direct for that. If that makes sense.
Okay. And does this cover everything in the city? The courts and the police will be able to use this?
Yes, it's our whole network. We don't have it segmented up into separate, the court and the police and all that. Everybody uses the same connection.
And when will it start, if it passes?
We are hoping to get live before the end of the year. So school district, that's why I'm here before LUTC instead of FEDRAC, is we're trying to get, King County has some work to be done. I think we're going to be turning everything on. We're scheduling it for the beginning of December. It will get a little bit of configuration and whatnot, but we should have something on before the end of the year.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So Thomas, I have a follow-up question on what Councilmember Honda asked. If you go back to your chart,
Yeah. Can you share the screen again?
so if you show the school district and the fire coming into City Hall.
Yep.
Are they going to use either the green or the yellow?
So they will be sharing the green. So I didn't want to get too technical in this.
But my question is, if they're sharing the green and we're paying more for the green, aren't we covering part of their cost?
So, all right, so bear with me for a
yeah,
moment here.
please.
So we've got a connection here, Federal Way City Hall to Sabi Data Center. In 2014, we did, or 2013, we did an in-kind agreement with Zayo. So we allowed them to use some of our right-of-way. In exchange, they built a whole bunch of fiber to us, or for us. This is one of those things. So we have 6 strands of dark fiber from Federal Way City Hall to Sabi Data Center. We are leveraging that, 2 of those strands for this connection, but the city is not on the hook on an ongoing basis for that. We don't have to pay a monthly charge. It's free. So it's just sitting there, it's built. So what we're doing as part of the additional equipment that I quoted there is between Federal Way City Hall and Sabi Data Center, there's going to be a network device. It's a dense wave division multiplexing. So it's using 2 pairs of fiber, but you're able to put 8 channels or 8 connections individually over that. So we're sharing the costs of that equipment. And then each,
We being the school district and the fire department?
yep, school district, fire department, and the city.
Okay.
And then King County INET has purchased a device to put at Sabi, and that's what we're buying the service of. So it's really all the agencies kind of pooling resources to make this thing happen,
Okay.
where each one of us individually could never afford to do something as,
So the true cost is much more than what you've presented here, maybe not to us, but collectively, it's not just a couple $1,000 a month.
collectively. So you'll see that at the end of the day, the true cost is what we are as the city paying for on a monthly basis, what you see there. Part of Project Agreement 82, you'll see that we're going to calculate a valuation for that fiber segment. But again, the city doesn't have, we don't pay monthly for that. And so it was done as part of a lease agreement deal with Zayo.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'll make a motion. I move to forward the proposed King County INET Customer Services contract to the November 19, 2024 consent agenda for approval.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you, Thomas.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go to the ordinance for Ziply Fiber Pacific franchise ordinance. Mr. Elliott.
Good evening. I'm Cole Elliott. I'm the Development Services Manager. I'm here for the Ziply Fiber franchise. What we've done is, the policy question is, should the city grant Ziply Fiber a franchise ordinance to place telecommunications and related appurtenances within the city's right-of-way? A little bit of the background. Ziply has requested a franchise from us, and in order to place the fiber optic for the city-owned and controlled rights-of-way. The terms of the franchise, of course, will be for 10 years, commencing on the effective date, and it is just granted just like every other utility provider that we have. The options to consider are recommend adoption of the proposed Ziply franchise ordinance and move it forward to the city council for first reading. Do not adopt the proposed ordinance and provide staff with some direction. The mayor's recommendation is to approve it and move it forward to the November 19th for first reading. Now, questions?
I see any questions? I don't think I see any, so we have a motion?
Mr. Chair, I do have a question.
Okay, good, thank you.
Thank you for the information. So if we approve this, and if somehow something happened to this line, are we obligated to fix it or to repair it?
No, sir.
No.
It falls under a normal franchise. We don't go out and repair PSC power lines, neither would we repair a Ziply fiber line.
Got it. Thank you.
Councilmember Walsh?
Will this provide more competition among providers for the residents of the city?
Yes, it will. And it's to spread the use of the fiber optic into the individual homes.
Okay. Is there a certain area of the city that it's going to be in, or throughout the city, or what's the,
Their overall plan is to extend it across the entire city with absolute redundancy that we just heard from Thomas on it. So we will have a couple more coming forward in the coming months
of other companies besides Zipley?
that would like to do it, yes.
All right, okay, thank you.
So,
I have a question.
yes, go ahead, Councilmember Honda.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No.
Do they have any, anything in Federal Way right now? Zipley?
Currently, no. They do not. They have not secured their franchise, so we haven't been able to allow them to go forward. They would like to.
Do they have a history of working well with other cities, and
On our checks, yes, they do.
what is the closest city that they're working with?
They're extensively through the city of Portland.
Oh, so we're the first one up in South King County?
Yes, they have started, I believe, up in Kirtland, but don't quote me on that one. That conversation with the representatives was almost a year ago.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Council President Whitmore?
So I'm wondering how they market, or who do they serve, or who are they?
Their primary customer will actually be residential according to their business plan.
And so they'll market to them to go with them rather than Comcast or somebody?
Yes, yes.
Interesting.
Yeah, a wider band, typically with the fiber optic that they're trying to run and faster response times.
Maybe lower price.
One can hope,
Competition's always good.
yes.
I guess I have one question. When they come in, assuming we approve this, then that would add to, it would move the utility tax around from one person, if they take somebody from Comcast or Frontier or whoever it is, and they get the business, they would be the ones supplying the utility tax, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Well, I'm no expert in the utility tax.
Right,
I leaned on the Public Works Director to nod
I'm
his head
assuming
for
it would,
that one.
yeah, it wouldn't generate any more revenue, but it would just, somebody else paying the bill. Okay. Okay, do I have a motion?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I move to forward the proposed ordinance to the first reading on November 19, 2024.
Second?
Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Thank you. Okay, we'll move to item E, asphalt overlay program preliminary project list and authorization to bid. Mr. Strong.
All right, good evening. I'm John Strong, a civil engineer for the city. All right, yes, so this is for the 2025 asphalt overlay program, preliminary project list and authorization to bid. Policy question, should the council approve the 2025 asphalt overlay list and authorize staff to proceed with design and the bidding of the proposed 2025 asphalt overlay program? Staff has, well, we've developed a list of streets for 2025 using our PMS systems and field verification. Here's our available funding, our REIT and MVET, 1.9 million, and our residential and arterial program solid waste utility tax of 3.3 million, giving us a total of 5.2 million. Here's all our schedules. We have 12th Avenue Southwest, 18th Avenue from Pack Highway to 288th. We have South 63rd, Milton Way to Enchanted Parkway, which is actually from the 2024 overlay that we weren't able to fund. The Campus Highlands West, Campus Highlands East, Scarborough, and Emberwood, all residentials. All results to 5.131 million. And then we have our 10% contingency, our in-house design, and our construction admin and inspection, which results in the final estimated project cost of just around 5.9 million. We have two options. One is to approve the list and authorize staff to bid the 2025 asphalt overlay project. Number 2 is to direct staff to modify the list and return to the committee for further action. The mayor recommends number 1. Do we have any questions?
I have a question.
Okay, you get to go first.
Thank you. I don't need to, I can wait.
You're up.
Okay. The PCI indicates a condition of the road, is that correct?
Yes.
So under Scarborough, which, some of the roads are in the 179, 88, 93, 93, 90. Are those roads being repaved?
Sorry, I can pull up the map real quick of Scarborough, and let's see. Can you repeat your question for what area you were specifying?
So I could read the streets off. 21st Avenue South is rated at 79. South 278 Court is rated at 88. 3rd Avenue South is rated at 80. 3rd Place South is 93. South 308th Street number 3 is 76. South 308th Street number 4 is 93. South 308th Street number 5 is 90. So are those roads being repaved,
So-
or is that?
Sorry, it's not the entire neighborhood of Scarborough, it's just this certain section, if you can look at the PowerPoint right now. For the south 279th Place, and then a couple of those cul-de-sacs, and then finish up a section of 25th Drive South, which we started on the north end, and we're just kind of connecting into that, and a couple cul-de-sacs off of that.
So at what rating do you decide to repave a road? What
It's-
numbers are you looking at?
It's a more complicated question, but anything under 70, and if we see a large group near a certain area, we try to get all the roads that we see deteriorating in that area. For this one specifically, 20th Place and South 279th Place are in really bad shape, really bad numbers, a lot of alligator cracking and everything. So we really need to focus on getting these 2 streets, done, even though a lot of the surrounding area isn't too bad.
If I
And
could,
how do you decide which neighborhoods? Because I'm sure that a lot of our neighborhoods have many of the same ratings.
It's just we have a huge list and of future overlays, and it's just kind of a long decision of finding what's the cheapest way, kind of grouping schedules that are close together for the contractor, and prioritizing some of the really bad areas like this one right here.
So the funding to overlay the residential streets is the increased utility tax? Is that correct?
could you rephrase that question, Councilmember Honda?
So to do the residential streets, we increased the taxes. It was on garbage, wasn't it?
It was, we have been waste, so that's usually where
So-
our overlay comes from.
If we didn't have that in the budget, then would these neighborhoods be overlaid?
We probably wouldn't have the money to do it, so, no.
No, these would not be being overlaid if that utility tax was not in place. So, and to answer your first question, Councilmember Honda, so we ideally are paving the lowest roads or the lowest rated roads every year. Reality is once roads get to a certain number, down below 50, the ability to overlay them goes out the window and they become full rebuilds. So when you have to do that, then we have to do a lot of stormwater work and a lot of other improvements that go in as well. So the cost to do that work goes up drastically. So the number of streets that we can tackle that are kind of in that really, really low range is limited in any given year. So realistically, we want to be repaving roads when they're somewhere between like 52 and 57. That's kind of the sweet spot. But, as Jonathan said, it's a little bit more scientific than that, trying to match up where roads are that need to be, and then, what else is in that same general vicinity that makes sense to do at the same time. I can assure you, we are not repaving any roads that are in the 80s or 90s.
So like 20th Place South is rated at 37, so are you doing more than just overlaying it?
Yeah, that one's got some pretty extensive dig outs, and it'll basically be a new road by the time we're done.
Yeah, we're going all the way down to the ground and even further down to replace some of the dirt or the soil.
Yeah. So this is one of those examples where had this been done probably 20 years ago, when it was at that 52 to 55, we probably would have paid, if you just kept everything in today's dollars, it probably would have been 30 to 40% of what we're going to end up paying this year to rebuild this road in full.
So how many of our other neighborhoods in the city are at 50 to 70% that we should be doing?
We have that in the PCI report. I don't have the numbers in front of me.
Okay.
It's a lot, and we also have a lot of roads that are well under that. I mean, we went almost 25 years without paving residential roads, and the status of some of the residential neighborhoods shows that. So I mean, we're playing catch up where we can, but we have a long road literally in front of us to get everything up to where we want it as a city.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate your answers.
One other question, isn't part of when you pick an area, mobilization pretty important? So once you're already there, you can start to get more bang for your buck because
Yeah.
you're not going as far?
And you could tell, like, 3 of our schedules, Campus Highlands West and East, they're right next to each other, and then you have 12th Ave, which is also bordering Campus Highlands as well. So these 3 schedules are like all 3 right next to each other.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Walsh?
Yeah. Is that why in the Emberwood neighborhood, like Third Place South, which is at a 23, and it's being done simply because you're doing the ones that are close to it?
Yeah, Emberwood is also connecting into some other spots that we overlaid in the last couple of years. It's just some roads that we kind of missed that are still in bad shape or have gotten worse over the last few years.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? Seeing none, do I have a motion?
I move to forward option 1 to the November 19, 2024 City Council consent agenda for approval.
Second?
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Awesome. Thank you. Have a good night.
And maybe I can make a quick comment. Councilman Ahmed brings up an interesting point when a council before this one here, and maybe she was even on the council at the time when they put the utility tax in on garbage for overlay. We may want to have some updates on that because that was done years ago, and actually see if there's any other things we can add or.
Yeah, so we usually do that as part of the kind of state of the streets that we do every other year in June.
Okay.
So I mean, if you want to do something in advance of that, we can certainly
So
do
will that
that.
be coming up in June of this year, 2025?
This year, I think it's 2 years out.
Okay,
But if council wants something as an update before that, we can certainly facilitate that.
okay, thank you. Okay, how about item F? Update of city response process to SCA Airport Sustainable Master Plan, and this is information only.
Good evening, Chair Dovey and council members, committee members. Let me go find my presentation here. There we are, very good. So a lot of these slides are pretty much for those at home or those who are watching, because this is information that you've known before, but basically we're in the mode as we have 30 days to the response. This is a theater acting for the folks. But basically, what you already know is the port has begun their public process as far as the airport expansion. And we will be bringing via the consul, not necessarily LUTC, a letter to put into the public record file that goes to the SAMP plan. And we'll probably be wordsmithing that at the December LUTC meeting, but it'll be on the agenda for consul, just so we know exactly what we want to do and what we want to ask for. So as you know, this is for the public, what it's going to result in, all the extra traffic, the noise. We will let the public know about the addition of gates, all sorts of other situations that will impact us. But also, the other key factor is there is something for us, which is raising the way airplanes fly over Federal Way when they land from the south to the north, from 2.75 degrees to to 3 degrees. That was a discovery by Chris Hall of Federal Way Marine Hills resident, because he's an international airport expert. That will help with the noise, and that is in the report. So we are now digging through the whole, there's like 250 pages, all these appendices, looking at the environmental impact of what this is going to do. And this will help us inform our folks who go to the meeting. While many of you are in DC, we will do our best to get as many residents there as possible. And also in the next couple of days, we might have a very creative way to have our residents there, whether they're there or not. But that's something to be stay tuned about, because they're going to have tables with lots of information, answer questions. They'll have a planning exam or a hearing examiner there, but there's no microphone, there's no public comment. But we want this information to get out, and we want our residents to experience it.
Hey,
So-
Bill?
Yes, sir.
One thing on the slide, not everybody knows probably where Wildwood is. It might be nice to give an address or make sure people know where
Okay,
they
we'll
might
make,
want to go.
we'll make sure we get that, but that's in the southern part of our city. I think we might be showing some of the Des Moines residents. So thank you for that. I'll make sure that gets updated. So, but basically, not only can our residents go to our public meeting, they can go to the other public meetings, but basically they need to write a letter, they need to send an email, they can go on the web and submit information, and then talk to the hearing examiner. That's the way to get it in front of the federal process and the FAA. Now, the key thing here is this is just phase 1. There's 3 different phases, as you know, but the public needs to know. The state process will be March, April, or May, where I think we will have also the sympathy of the state and the leaders in that situation. And then once this is all in final draft, it will then go to the Port Commission. And those 5 people will have a lot of influence on what can be done, because as it's been echoed in this chamber and both at the council meeting and LUTC, help us. What can you do to help us, help our residents? So we're going to continue to use these advocacy avenues. As you can see, we already worked with the Federal Way Mirror, and so we've got this first article, and they're analyzing it very carefully in our mail, as they promised, and they'll be here on Wednesday night, by the way, at the council meeting to talk about their outreach as well, too. This has hit our mailboxes and all the other mailboxes, and many languages are available to let people know what's going on, so they can comment on the impact. But basically, the bottom line is, how do we, in this process over the next year, have possible solutions for our noise challenges, the ultrafine particle challenges, the late night noise? What's some ways to change things federally? For instance, there's a Part 150 process which measures just basically sound around the airport, and it's based on an old federal set of metrics that came in from the last century. And it's basically about, it's not about frequency, it's just about what happens over a whole day versus what happens intensely to our residents. Our residents are about frequency. The ones by the airport is about the other kind of measure. So in DC, there's advocacy for a different measurement for sound insulation and other impacts. And so that'll be another track from what we're doing here. But as I mentioned, we'll be discussing this at the next LUTC meeting. I think my PowerPoint's locked up here. And we'll keep you informed as we attend the meeting, via email. We will then come to the December meeting and talk about the next part of the strategy, have the letter pretty much ready to go, and then discuss it at council. And then, of course, we'll have Dave Kaplan from the port there on Wednesday to talk about things as well, too. Now, one thing that may give us a little bit more time is we have signed, as you know, the letter with the other 5 cities to try to delay this until January 15th. We were pretty much prepared because of the work of Dave Berger and Chris Hall and the report we did 7 years ago and all the advocacy with former legislators and other people who are at this dais. But the other cities have had change in staffs. The holidays are wreaking havoc, and they've asked the FAA and the port for January 15th. So we might have a little bit more time there. But like I said, that's the federal process. Then we have the state process. Then we have the Port Commission. So it's, as Earl Weaver would say, it's a 9-inning game, and we're going to be there for all the 9 innings. So any questions?
Bill, I don't see any questions. Thank you for the report.
Are you welcome?
Oh, wait,
Bill.
I see one now.
I was just gonna say, thank you, Bill, for your diligence on it.
Or you're welcome. Yeah, we live under it, so,
Yeah,
thank you.
thank you.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to go to item G, ordinance, permanent supportive housing and transitional housing code amendments. One of the more fun ones to talk about, right?
Right. Okay, good evening, Chair Dovey and council members. I'm Becky Chapin, senior planner here, and I'll be presenting the proposed code amendments for permanent supportive housing. And going forward, the amendments will be described as permanent supportive housing or PSH, but they also include the transitional housing as well. So the policy question is, should the City Council adopt the proposed text amendments to Federal Revised Code Title 19 relating to permanent supportive housing and transitional housing? So the purpose behind us bringing this to you today is that the Growth Management Act, the GMA, was amended by House Bill 1220, requiring cities to adopt a comprehensive plan, including a housing element that identifies sufficient land capacities for all housing, including for all housing needs. Back in 2021, when this code was initially amended, and implemented, the proposed amendments included a separation between permanent supporting housing units of 3 or more units, which is currently in code today. However, when the code was updated in response to that House bill, the allocated number of permanent supportive housing units in the city was not yet established, and at this time, at that time, it was stated that the code would be reevaluated when the allocated number was provided. And then recently, the state has provided us with a specific number of required units that we must plan and amend our standards and to meet the allocated need. So the comprehensive plan and development regulations must be amended with the GMA when they are adopted or amended through the periodic update process, which is going to happen, scheduled for adoption in December of 2024. So that's why we're bringing you this code amendment today. So the city is required to provide housing options for the entire population of the city. And this graph shows the number of units the city has to plan for by 2024. And so the gray bar here is for the permanent supportive housing, to show what it looks like there. The King County countywide planning policy allocated 946 units of permanent supportive housing to meet the city's need. Based on the existing development regulations and zoning applicable to permanent supportive housing, there's only capacity for 388 units. The city's land capacity analysis identifies a deficit of 558 units. So this is some of the existing development regulations and zoning we have in code today. The permanent supportive housing is allowed in the following zones. It's our suburban estate, single-family residential, multifamily residential, neighborhood business, community business, city center core, city center frame, and commercial enterprise. And then each zone where PSH projects are allowed has a distancing requirement of 1 1/3 mile, or 7,040 feet, between projects of 3 or more units. The existing unit cap for each project is shown here, and it varies by zoning. So in the SE zone, it's 10 units, RS is 6 units, RM 50, and the BN are 50. BC is 50, and then the city center core is 150 units. City center frame and CE are both 110 units. And so the maps that I'm showing you today, they were created with data obtained by land capacity analysis and our buildable and redevelopable lands. And so to reiterate, as shown here, the current zoning and development regulations that we currently have in code only allows a capacity of 388 units. So these are the proposed amendments that we have. First one would be reducing the distancing requirements between projects to 5,400 feet. An example of that distancing requirement would be from City Hall to Trouvé, the apartments on 1st and 348th. And then the second option would be to increase the capacities in certain zones. So on this one, would be increasing the city center core to 200. And this image down here is what a 200-unit development would look like. In the city center frame and the CE, the max would be 150 units. And then the BC, BN, and RM would be 100 units, and those are kind of examples over here of what those units would look like. And then there wouldn't be any changes to the SE or suburban estate or single-family residential zones. So those are 6 to 10 units, and those are some examples of what that would look like down below. So with the decreased horizontal separation and then the increased unit capacities, we get closest to the allocated number of 946 units. This would provide around 956 units of PSH housing. And then this is an example of what the existing use zone charts are in the city center core for these uses. The proposed changes would be to special regulations notes 1 and 2, and this would be changed like this in all the zones where these would be allowed. So this is our adoption process. On October 2nd, we met with Planning Commission at a public hearing. Today's the LUTC meeting, and then we're hoping November 19th would be first reading in City Council, and then December 3rd would be City Council's second reading. This is the criteria for adopting development regulation amendments. I'm not going to go into detail on meeting what these all are. They were in your staff reports, so they were addressed there, meeting how this would meet all those criteria. And then the recommendation, like I said, at the October 2nd meeting, Planning Commission forwarded the proposal amendments to the City Council without a recommendation. So to hear today, the mayor's recommendation would be adopting the proposed text amendments to Title 19 of the Federal Revised Code as presented. Do you have any questions?
I'll let Mr. Walsh go first.
I guess my first question is with the numbers that the county provides, 946 permanent supportive housing units required. Assuming that there was just one occupant in each one of those units, that is nearly 1% of the population of Federal Way. I mean, how do they figure that 1% of the population of Federal Way would require permanent supportive housing? And I know that you didn't come up with those numbers, but do you have any idea how they came up with those numbers?
I'll have to
Keith, it looks like you're coming
phone a
up.
friend.
They have one of those magic 8 balls. No, I'm just kidding.
That is what I thought.
So the way that it this is a trickle down effect. So what happens is the Department of OFM comes up with housing projections. They then allocate it out to the counties. So statewide, housing projections over the next 20 years got allocated out to all the counties within the state. At the county level, the county then sliced the pie again to figure out how many units of their allocation would go into each jurisdiction within King County. So that's the way that it kind of trickled down to us, is we got a percentage of a percentage. And because of the size of Federal Way, which, we're the 5th largest city in King County, we got the 5th largest slice of pie at the end of the day. So, and again, just to be clear for those that are listening out there, this is a planning exercise. We need to make sure our zoning can accommodate these numbers. It doesn't mean that many housing units will be built in the city over the next 20 years. It is likely that we won't come close to that number.
nor does it mean we have to approve every single application that comes in. We can still review that and approve or deny it based on criteria in our code.
Okay. And then my other question would be is you had the one with reducing the distance between them, and then also increasing capacity. Is it an either one or the other, or is it both that you're proposing?
It's both. It gets us closer to our allocated number by doing both those options.
So we really have two levers we can pull, right? One is we can shrink the distance in between these projects, or we could make them bigger. And as we talked about this with the Planning Commission, as we talked about it as staff, we thought that the optimal outcome was to do a little bit of each. Make the spacing a little bit smaller, but allow for a few more units per project to happen so that it was kind of, we thought, the best outcome for the city.
Yeah. I was just thinking that the one where what was it, 200 units, I mean, I cannot even imagine what it'd be like. I mean, and I understand that this is just an exercise, that it probably will not become a reality, but if it were, 200 units of permanent supporting housing in the city center core, that wouldn't be good.
And I do want to note that currently the code caps it at 150, so it's already a pretty large development that would be allowed there, but it is definitely significantly larger.
All right, yeah. And like I say, I understand that it doesn't mean it's going to happen, but it's, so.
Well, if you plan for it, it probably will happen. So, I mean, but my question is, couldn't we take an area in the city and make it all, and say this, whatever this piece is, instead of making them closer, take a big swash of land and say, this is where we want to do it, instead of all over the town?
Unfortunately, the bill that originally put this into place mandated that essentially these had to be allowed in all zones in which residences were allowed. So unless you literally zoned only a tiny corner of the city as a residential area where any residences could go, you couldn't do that.
But couldn't we keep the distance and target it to an area? I mean, by reducing the distance and increasing the numbers, you go one way instead of just saying, yeah, you can have this, we're going to keep the distance the same, but this square of the property where something is in Federal Way, we're going to concentrate it all in one area.
So you could. I mean, theoretically, it's possible. I think, what it says is you have to allow it, but you could allow it at 1 unit per whatever, and create kind of a
hub?
Pick your adjective.
A gathering area?
So, so part of, I think the way that planning has kind of evolved since the 60s is recognizing that affordable housing really should not be consolidated. It used to be that they would put all of the poor people in one place, and, those would be public housing projects.
But let's not call this poor people. This is subsidized housing. And a lot of people qualify. They don't necessarily have to be poor.
They're making between 0 and 30% of the area median income. So these are folks that are, most of them need services. And so consolidating them all in one part of the city would give that part of the city a certain stigma. And yes, if that's what the council felt was the right approach, we could probably construct something that would meet state statute.
Yeah. But I guess you hit it right on the nose. These are people or individuals or whatever that are going to need services. They're going to need transportation to get to those services. They're going to, I don't know, everybody's been to New York City. I mean, that's how all those buildings started. It was for services for teachers who couldn't afford to live there back in the day. I mean, couldn't we not, make it all in one area so the services are there, the infrastructure's there, the roads are there, the schools are there, close by, if we wanted to? Not saying we would, but
So general philosophy of city planning these days is that's a bad choice. The projects basically got built and got demolished. So I would posit for you this consideration is the extended stay, and there's like 80 units there. Oh, where did Becky go? Is there about 80? So the extended stay is 80 units, and my guess is when that gets actually occupied, most of the city won't know that that's any different than any other apartment building in the city. It won't seem like it from the outside.
Right.
But you put 10 of those, all in concentric rings, it's going to have a very different feel about it, and the rest of the city will perceive it a lot differently. That would be my opinion.
Council
Well,
President?
don't we already have HUD housing, Laurelwood Gardens, and another area right off Pack Highway and about 336 to the east. I mean, we already have low-income housing, if you want to call it that, that is lower-income housing run by Housing and Urban Development. And so what's wrong with that?
Nothing.
So why can't part of this be like that?
It can be, I think. I think that any HUD subsidies would be potentially part of the financing for building some of these new units that are going to be at 0 to 30% AMI. That is possibly how some of it will get funded.
Yeah, so you're not talking vertical. It's all like, you wouldn't know that it was HUD housing. It's just like duplexes.
So it could be that, but it also could be like an apartment building. It all depends on the builder and where they're getting their funding from. There's different choices. But if we consolidate it all in one place, the only choice is to make it kind of mid-rise housing because we need the densities to get to the 946.
Councilor Daniel, I'll let you next. I have one more question.
And then I have,
One more question along that line. We have the Veterans facility on Highway 99.
William J. Wood.
Yeah, is that considered 0 to?
It is.
It would, okay, and
It's the only one we have right now.
is the new one being built down by the Transit Center down by 288? Is that considered one also?
So,
I don't know, down past the other parking, right?
So Shelter Resources that's building Redondo Heights is what it's called.
Yep.
I believe it is at 60% AMI.
60, okay.
And I just want to be clear, there is a distinction between permanent supportive housing and 0 to 30% AMI. Those are not necessarily the same thing. You can be 0 to 30% AMI and not permanent supportive housing. You could also be 0 to 30% AMI and permanent supportive housing.
They could be both or separate.
Exactly, they're different buckets. If you look at the housing allocation, you'll see there's a separate bucket, I believe, for 0 to 30% AMI that's non-permanent supportive housing. So they're not necessarily the same category.
Okay. Councilmember Daniel?
maybe you can educate me a little bit more than what is the definition of permanent supportive housing? It's not the 0 to 80.
I've been in enough of these meetings now that I have the statute already pulled up with the definition sitting in front of me. So I'll read the whole thing. It's about 3 sentences long. It's from state law. Subsidized leased housing with no limit on length of stay that prioritizes people who need comprehensive support services to retain tenancy and utilizes essentially lower admissions practices that lower barriers to entry. It's paired with on-site or off-site voluntary services to support a person living with a complex and disabling behavioral health or physical health condition. And then the last piece, which is key, is that it's for people who are experiencing homelessness or at imminent risk of homelessness.
Okay, that last part's the main piece then, isn't it? Yeah, okay.
Indeed.
So literally what we're looking at is 946 units for what we have going in that extended stay then? Is that pretty much the model? Because the 0 to 30 AMI understood as 24,000 a year with our 80,000 AMI, but with that comment right there, pretty much sounds like the model that we're looking at replicating is we're going to be what the extended stay is currently.
Most likely, it'll be buildings like the extended stay. It's gonna need to have, King County made that happen with money that they put together and for Health Through Housing. And so, it's gonna be other organizations that will amass the amount of money that it's necessary to buy a piece of property and then build a project. It will likely come in those kind of chunks, which is why we have these caps as well as the horizontal distance. It's also, you know, we want to kind of cap the number of units on each project so we don't have a big tower. Because if you remember in our downtown, we basically allowed for buildings that don't have a maximum building height. They're based on a maximum number of units per acre. And so what we're trying to do is keep these in scale with the extended stay, because I think the extended stay, is it 4 stories?
There's at least 3, if not 4.
Is it 3? Okay, so, you know, like, we're talking like a 3 or 4-story building. Councilmember Walsh, if you remember some of the buildings from Trent for TC3, we looked at all those elevations, those kind of 5/2, each of those buildings, they were estimating 250 to 300 units. So the size of a building can get 300 units in it. The caps here we're talking about is limiting it to 200 units in our kind of our city center core area. So we're talking probably 4-story buildings maximum for projects that would have this type of housing in it.
And is this type of housing open, is it just strictly, when they build these developments, do they build strictly this model? Because we have a bunch of them where they, like, we'll come in and they'll get their tax break because they do, I don't know what the percentage is, but a certain percentage of it is for low income. Now, is this model, I do not see anybody doing anything but this one model in it.
It is not likely that you would have a mixed project where, like, say, some of it would be at 50% AMI and the rest would be at PSH.
Yeah.
Because of the social services that are associated with permanent supportive housing, it's most likely that the entire project will be permanent supportive housing, because that way it's more efficient for them to provide the services that those residents need.
Yeah, and just one thing to add to that, that's by far the vast majority of the time is that situation. There are situations, though, where a good example in the community is Fusion. Fusion will take a unit, like a single unit or maybe 2 units that's in a 10-unit complex, or that's one townhouse in a development, and they'll actually run that one unit as a PSH unit, while the rest are just standard non-PSH type residential units. But those are, again, we're talking like 1 or 2 here or there type situations where it's 1 unit out of a few. That's going to be the vast minority compared to these larger complexes which house 50, 100, 150.
Gotcha. I guess my last question is, what is the legal ramifications for not doing this then?
Well, a few things. Number one, if any development, if somebody came in for a project and they applied to the city and the city denied the project because we hadn't updated our code to allow it, they would probably immediately appeal that decision and be successful, and thus the city would have to allow them there. So that's one consequence. The second consequence, and this is perhaps just as significant, if not a bigger consequence, is we've received any number of comments on our comprehensive plan from various litigious groups, such as FutureWise and others, including State Department of Commerce and others, saying you don't comply with the permanent supportive housing targets. We'd almost certainly get our periodic update appealed, and likely successfully by those groups if we were to not do this. In other words, we'd have to do it anyway, if that makes sense.
The strong hand of government comes smashing down.
Indeed.
I mean, it's facts,
Indeed,
just
no,
facts.
absolutely true. Yeah.
Okay. And I'm just curious, my second last question, I guess that was, this is the model they're looking at doing with one of the 2 lots down with the new transit center, isn't it? They're looking for this kind of model for their housing. The Sound Transit's looking at selling the property for. That's my understanding, if that was correct. I think so. Sure.
Go ahead, Keith.
So I don't think we know that. So right now, Sound Transit by statute is required to provide 80% of their surplus property for housing at 80% AMI. As was shared in the meeting with Councilmember Walsh, because I got to attend that one, so I know what was said. What they said is by statute it's 80% AMI, but they look to prioritize housing for incomes less than that. But is that 60% AMI? Is it 50% AMI? Is it permanent supportive housing? I don't think we know that, because ultimately, they're going to get proposed, I don't think they know that either at this point. You know, they're going to write a request for proposals, and they're going to get proposals back from potential developers that will say, I propose to build something at a certain level of affordability. At that point, then they'll know if somebody's going to propose a PSH project or not.
Okay, thanks.
Could I jump in there, Keith, and ask you one more question?
Yes.
You know, permanent supporting housing, the facility where like the Woods, the veterans home,
Yeah.
right? That's considered permanent supportive housing, is it not?
It is.
And a long time ago, many years ago, rezoned that whole area down Highway 99 to go to 4 to 5 stories. And then originally it was so people would build places to live and have great views and make it worth more, I guess. But, I mean, if we took a slot like that down Highway 99 and the Woods properties, I don't think we've had a lot of problems with it, and it gives great support. But why wouldn't you take an area like that and just extend it all the way down and say, here, we got enough place for people to build to have 900 supportive units, all independent, because we got plenty of land down there to do that, because Woods is what, 70 people? I think, something like that?
Probably.
Yeah, so you only have to build 10, and you have it all along an area where you have services and you have buses, and it's, you know, right on Highway 99, and nobody else is developing it. Why couldn't you do something like that? I mean, I'm just asking the question.
Yeah, no, I think this circles back to the same conversation we had earlier about consolidating it versus spreading it out and mixing it in. And
Could you spread it all the way up and down 9099 on the left-hand side if you wanted to?
I'm not looking at the math right now, but I think what that would end up being is it would end up being pretty large unit numbers, and it would end up with them actually being separated pretty close together in that zone, because you'd need to fit a bunch of them in that strip. So you'd be talking one, and then 500 feet another one, and then 500 feet another one
Yeah,
type
but
situation.
you changed the distance in one area instead of the.
Right, but I'm just saying that, like, you wouldn't be able to get the 5,400-foot separation that we currently
No, I
have
know,
between.
but
It would have to be shrunk significantly in that corridor.
But if you take a zone and you shrink it down to, hey, you can be next door to each other, then all of a sudden you get economies of scale if somebody wants to build it instead of all over the city.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just asking the
Yeah,
question.
you definitely can from a legal perspective. It gets back to the policy question of whether it's a good idea or not.
I have a question. if
Go ahead.
I could. How long do we have to get this done? How many years?
Oh, it has to be done with our comp plan.
Yeah, it has to be done with our comp plan, and we're adopting our comp plan in December of 2024.
No, but how long do we have to have these units built?
There's no requirement to build the units. There's just a requirement that we permit them in the quantities that we've been allocated. And if you're asking what the window of time there is, it's 2044.
So we have 20 years before anything, if we didn't get to the 900 and some units, before any impact to the city would happen.
There's no
Correct?
impact. So if we allow this and there's only one unit that's built between now and 2044, there will be no penalty to the city whatsoever. There's no requirement that anybody ever build these units.
As long as we don't turn anyone down if they qualify.
And so long as our zoning permits people to be able to apply and get approval for projects that would get them to 946 overall.
So when I look at the map that was provided and see the potential sites all around the city, I look at the issues we have with transportation in Federal Way. And our transportation, when you go outside downtown Federal Way, isn't very good. And then I think of the comprehensive support services, and, you know, the farther away from 99 and the downtown area, the less services are close by. So, you know, that's kind of a concern, especially since folks living in these units are going to really need transportation and comprehensive support services that may not be very close by.
Do you want to address that, Keith? I can address it if you want me to, but.
So, no disagreement there, Councilmember Honda. I think, you know, the city, again, the city is tasked with creating zoning regulations that allow for the number it is that we have to plan for over the next 20 years. The map that Becky showed earlier shows quite a bit of dispersion for where those projects might locate. There's absolutely an advantage to be on a piece of property that is served by transit and that might be close to other social services. That means that if I was looking to build something in Federal Way, I know that I have to separate myself from William J. Wood by a certain amount, depending on what the council adopts. But other than that, whoever comes in next sets the next dot on the map in terms of separation requirements. I am not going to pick a location that doesn't have access to transit unless my operator for that housing unit has their own transit system or transportation kind of ability. So I'm going to assess the potential for locating in Federal Way based on all the things you've mentioned, and it's going to mean that there's some locations along Pack Highway that make a lot more sense than some other locations that might be zoned correctly, but don't have the right amenities for locating a type of housing in that spot, unless I want to bring a lot more money to the table to provide additional transportation and additional access to services. So there is a disparity in kind of how we're doing this because there's better locations and less good locations, but you could say that's true for any housing and any land use in the city, is there's better places and less better places.
Okay, thank you. It just seems like it would be a concern to me, and I wouldn't want the city to get in a tough position that we would be asked by some of the developers to provide more transportation if they choose to build in an area that doesn't have the transportation needs that their clients might use.
The only comment I'd make, which maybe can help with a little bit of that, is that the way that staff have set up the caps on the amount of units, it's based on the zone that that facility would be in, and intentionally the caps are very low for the areas of the city that don't have great access to transportation, like residential, single-family, suburban estate areas. The only place you start to get to a substantial number of units that are allowed, the 50, 100, 150 range, is when you get to commercial business, the BC zone. That's the zone that's right along Pack Highway. City Center Core, which of course is next to 320th and Pack Highway, and the denser districts. In other words, you don't get to those big numbers unless you're next to something that has pretty good transit and facilities.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Walsh?
Now, we're having to do this because in 2021, the legislature passed HB 1220, correct?
Correct.
It seems like that another thing, I doubt if it'd go very far, but it seems like that this ought to be on the legislative agenda. That, I mean, hey, the legislature's putting us in this situation. They can undo it too. I mean, they're once again basically trying to micromanage cities such as Federal Way. And anyway, it seems like that's one thing that we should be doing as well, is telling the legislature that we don't want this.
Can I ask two more clarifying questions? If you were to concentrate where you could do this, in essence, you're making it, and it was less space, you're making it easier for developers to put these projects in if they have the money, correct?
I'm not sure.
Well,
that-
let me rephrase my
Yeah.
question, because I asked, could we take a zone along Highway 99 and say this is the designated area, and, because it's got transportation and it could have services, or you can get to services and made by the veterans location, here you build right next to it, we're okay with that. But by doing that, we're actually concentrating and we'd make it more accessible for people to build projects if they have money, correct?
I don't agree with that
You don't?
assumption,
Okay.
no. I think what you're assuming is that if developer A builds on the northeast corner of Pack Highway and Pick Your Street, and developer B builds on the southeast corner of Pack Highway and Pick Your Street, that they'll be able to share the cost of providing social services. And I don't think that's true, because I think each operator of each facility will be completely independent. So there may be some synergies that you might be able to create, but I don't know, at the end of the day, it's most likely going to be, can I find the right piece of property at the right price, that's the right size, with the access to transit, as Councilmember Honda
Right, which,
identified earlier.
yeah. And I guess my last question, do we have properties that, as we pass this, or if we decide to pass it this way, that have been asked to do this type of thing that couldn't today, based on our zoning? Or-
Nobody's talked to us about doing a PSH project since we adopted our original code in '21. You know, the county bought the extended stay, and there's really, other than Fusion, which is doing a duplex, there's really nothing going on, because it takes a lot of money,
Right, so money would be the limiting factor of
public money,
public money. Because we don't have to pay for anything if nobody comes forward.
right?
And I think the state has a $5 billion deficit next year.
Well, that never stopped anybody. Okay. And we have to pass this by when?
December 3rd.
December 3rd. So if we get the clock ticking and we change our mind, we could always do that, right? Not that that's, anyway.
Yes, if you're talking about other legal ways of meeting it and changing
Yeah,
that in the future, yeah, we can always do that.
Or look at the map a little differently and say, hey, what
Yep.
about this? And you put your GIS system together and go, oh, yeah, you could do that. Okay.
Yeah, I guess that kind of going to the direction that Councilmember Dovey was going, I mean, we could have it so that in the, what is it, the BC zone, is that what's along, you know, have the, you know, instead of the 5,000 foot or whatever, have a 2,500 foot distance or something like that. I don't know whether that's a good idea or not, but it's an idea.
Doesn't really sound like we have any choice, but we have to move it forward, but we have 2
You
weeks.
guys can toggle the switches any way you want, as
Yeah.
long as we get to 946 at the end of the day,
Okay.
or more.
We could build one big stadium and have 960 beds. In the neighborhood? Okay. Would anybody,
I'm ready to.
you're ready?
Yep. Mr. Chair, I move to forward the proposed ordinance to the first reading on November 19, 2024.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. I don't like it, but I'll vote for it. And we'll probably be sitting in your office, Keith. Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Item H is the annual comprehensive plan amendments. This is the rest of this big book, right?
Not quite the big book.
We're not right to the big book
No, this is
yet,
the mini
okay.
book that will.
You get the big book.
This is the annual.
And, okay, let's go. Mr. Lewis, you're up.
All right. Good evening, Committee Chair Dovey, Council Members Tran, Walsh, Kochmar, McDaniel, and Honda. I'm Senior Planner Evan Lewis, and these are the 2024 Annual Comprehensive Plan Amendments. The first is for the Flowers Property Rezone and related Comprehensive Plan Amendment, and the second is for map and text amendments to the Comprehensive Plan related to the Commons Mall property. Council accepted both of these onto the annual 2024 docket back in February. The policy question is, should the City Council adopt the 2024 Annual Comprehensive Plan Amendments? And we'll start with the Flowers Property Rezone and Comprehensive Plan Amendment. So this was requested by applicant Atisha Flowers. This is a 0.9 acre parcel here on the southwest corner of South 308th Street and 14th Avenue South. The requested rezone is from the current zoning of residential multifamily 1800, RM 1800, to professional office or PO zone. And the applicant's reason for requesting this was to accommodate, so the applicant has a approved daycare use on that site. Under the current zoning of RM 1800, it's capped at serving no more than 50 children. So to allow serving more children than 50, the PO zone does allow that, and so that I believe is the underlying purpose for this requested rezone. In order to be consistent with our comprehensive plan, it also triggers a comp plan amendment from multifamily to our new commercial comp plan designation, which would be adopted along with the updated the comp plan periodic update, which is the next item on the agenda. So to the north of this site is Federal Way High School, to the south, a medical office, to the east, Bell Ridge Townhomes condominiums, and to the west is Lake Easter Estate condominiums. Some relevant background, and this is all expanded on more in the staff report as it relates to the criteria for approving these. From 1990 to 2013, this particular parcel was zoned for office. It also had a comp plan designation for office. There was a rezone request in 2013 with the anticipation of multifamily. That multifamily proposal never came in. There have been no multifamily proposals on that site in the last 11 years, and nor have there been any pre-app meetings for multifamily. The applicant received approval this year for a daycare use on that property. Again, capped under the current zoning up to 50 children. It received a building permit issuance back in June, and a certificate of occupancy was issued in September of this year. Additional background, so as part of our comp plan periodic update with regard to our traffic modeling, we didn't assume any additional residential growth on this property. So, so that doesn't create any, this rezone does not create any inconsistencies with regard to our traffic modeling. The proposed use, staff finds that it is compatible with surrounding uses. Also, sometimes there's concerns about, well, rezoning a property if should the site redevelop in the future, what else is allowed under the zone you're rezoning it to. So the PO zone has significantly fewer allowed uses than the RM zone. So this just gives you an example in case there were questions to compare the uses that are allowed under the current zoning, RM, to the professional office zoning. There are, I mean, if there's concerns about other uses that are allowed under the new zoning, there's fewer overall uses allowed under the new zoning. And again, this is zoning that exists on the site up until 2013. There are a lot of factors to be considered for site and project-specific rezones. I won't go through all of these. These are the factors that have to be considered. And then there are 3 different sets of approval criteria. All of these are detailed in depth in the staff report. So that was the Flowers amendment. The next amendment is for the Commons Mall property. This was requested by applicant Merlone Geyer to accommodate more and greater redevelopment possibilities for the Commons Mall site. So in the biggest picture, the request is to amend the motorized and non-motorized transportation network depicted on the comprehensive plan maps for the Commons Mall site, and also to ensure that comp plan text is consistent with those map amendments. There were a few different iterations of the applicant's request since they originally applied about a year ago. Also, a year ago, our comp plan was somewhat less fully baked than it is right now. So there's been somewhat of an iterative process. And we've arrived at a point where the applicant's request is fully aligned with the city-initiated changes in the 2024 comprehensive plan update. And there's a recent letter from the applicant with regard to that in your packets. That said, there's 5 categories, general categories of what's included in the final version of the applicant's request listed in the staff report. To visualize some of those, the first was to replace a depiction of a future minor collector ring road that's currently depicted in the comprehensive plan on the Commons Mall site, replacing that with a future north-south principal collector road through the Commons Mall site. So on the left is what's depicted right now in the transportation chapter of our comp plan. And as part of the periodic update, the map on the right shows the single north-south principal collector planned road. Next, the applicant is requested to clarify that street cross-sections and standards associated with different street topologies to be addressed in city code and development standards as opposed to the comp plan. So right now, in our 2015 comp plan, there's a map of street typologies citywide and associated cross-sections. It's quite unusual to have that level of detail in a comprehensive plan. So the city was already planning to take those out, and those have been removed as part of the periodic update. And those sorts of things are implemented through city code and through public works development standards. Next was to clarify that roads on the Commons Mall site can be either public or private so long as they're open to the public. And there is language in the transportation chapter that addresses that specifically, that planned roadways once constructed by non-city entities may be publicly or privately owned, but any such privately owned roadway must function as a public roadway. Fourth is to ensure an appropriate amount of flexibility in the implementation of planned roads relative to how they're depicted in the chapter. I won't read all of that, but there is language that speaks to that specifically in the updated comprehensive plan, transportation chapter. And lastly, request to ensure that references to street and pedestrian improvements are sufficiently broad to ensure an appropriate level of flexibility for redevelopment options on the Commons Mall site. And there are updated maps in our centers chapter that instead of referring to planned roads, planned bike routes, and planned pedestrian crossings, they're either potential or planned or potential to provide more flexibility for redevelopment on the Commons Mall site. So city considerations expanded on in greater detail in the staff report is to accommodate greater flexibility for site redevelopment, to achieve a greater amount and diversity of growth in city center, accommodate more mixed-use development in city center, and to break up the current super block that exists on the Commons Mall site. And also to provide further clarity in how the maps in the comprehensive plan are interpreted. These are all the factors, again, to be considered in comp plan amendments and the criteria all addressed in the staff report. So both amendments, they were docketed in February, received SEPA determinations in July, Public Planning Commission hearing in September, and if this is forwarded on, it would go to first read November 19th and adoption, hopefully the same timeline as the periodic update in December. There were no public comments received to date on the annual amendments. And the recommendation is approval from Planning Commission, and the mayor's recommendation is to approve the 2024 annual comprehensive plan amendments.
Councilmember McDaniel?
Yeah, the only question I have is a question of clarity. So I know previously we had talked about changing the zoning so they're more in columns, so it makes it easier to move stuff back and forth, so we didn't have to do once a year adjustments. Are these those kind of items, or is that something completely different?
I think that's something different.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no other questions, do I have a motion?
I move to forward the proposed ordinance to the first reading on November 19, 2024.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, thank you very much. Now we get to go to the ordinance, the comp plan periodic update. Oh. Huh? Did I miss something? No?
No, I just said the young lady here.
Yeah.
I don't recognize her.
And Keith, you're on the agenda, but you're not doing this, right? You're the pitch hitting if we need to throw you a curveball?
What a great question.
Okay, thank you.
All right, good evening, Chair Dovey, committee members Tran and Walsh, and Council President Kochmar, as well as the other council members here tonight. I'm Holly Bozak, Planning Manager. Nice to see you all this evening. So we all know why we're here tonight, again, to continue the conversation of the Comprehensive Plan Periodic Update. You were brought this in October, the first part, which was chapters 1 through 3. Tonight, we are going to continue on with our presentation. So the key of tonight is to focus on the policy question, should the city adopt the comprehensive plan as it's presented to you? And the presentation tonight will include chapters 4 through 14, as well as the implementation appendix, and we will talk about committee action. To start off the chapters tonight, we have our Economic Development Director, Tanya Carter, who will be doing the first part of the presentation.
Good evening, Chair Dovey, Council Members Tran and Walsh, Council President Kochmar, and Committee Member, or Council Member McDaniel. Tanya Carter, your Economic Development Director. I know that there's going to be a really long presentation tonight on this, so I'm going to keep it very brief. I just have 2 slides. So there are essentially 2 main changes in the Economic Development chapter in the comprehensive plan. Essentially, I will highlight the changes here on a high level. I won't go into major detail on all of the sections in the chapter, but essentially, this is a document that gets updated periodically, and so things that economic development considers in the update are, of course, economic shifts, which we have seen some tremendous economic shifts in the past couple of years. Policy updates, again, there's a lot of governmental policy changes at the state level. For example, here we are one of the first cities to have adopted TIF, which is huge for the city. So that's also kind of shifted the economics of our downtown redevelopment. And then also community needs and feedback. And so, as you all know, I'm very passionate about the diversity of our city, being from an immigrant family myself, ESL person. So I'm extremely passionate about pushing those priorities forward. So again, not to go into too much detail on that, the other thing that we have also updated is we have aligned the sections in the chapter to be aligned with the International Economic Development Council, which is kind of our governing body in economic development. So the sections have been renamed and streamlined accordingly to those names that are also found with the IEDC. So essentially, if you are looking at the chapters, the sections, or at the economic development chapter, the sections that you have employment, we do have some employment numbers from GMA that we are obviously cognizant of. Business retention and expansion, as you know, that is what we consider the backbone and the cornerstone of economic development, to make sure that the businesses that are here are taken care of and they can expand and grow. Business attraction, of course, a very interesting and exciting part of economic development. That is definitely ongoing work, but it is much more expensive. And even as site selectors today are cautioning, that is definitely, it's kind of a needle in a haystack now to attract something like in the old days, 500 or 1,000 or 1,000 plus companies to any city in the country. Next on the in the chapter is new business creation. This is something that has really kind of burgeoned in the last decade, is entrepreneurship and starting up a business. So that's something, of course, that we are very supportive of in the city. And we will definitely in the next years be creating platforms for businesses in that way to flourish, as we've already started to do so. One other shift is in placemaking. So there's another section here, placemaking and sister city coordination. Placemaking really has shifted in the last 10, 15 years. It used to be that, attracting a big corporation or a big organization was the way to really do economic development. Now the tables have completely shifted towards placemaking, which means that amenities and, a sense of place and something to do and somewhere to be, that's what the workforce is attracted to. So now the tables are turning insofar as it's more of a shift towards businesses follow the talent. And I think we've seen that, most notably with Amazon too, the HQ2, that Amazon was really doing a countrywide search to see, where they could really have the biggest catchment area of workforce. And Citrus City Coordination, something again that's very near and dear to my heart. It is also something that we have a longstanding relationship with 2 countries, and now in the last couple of years, 3 countries and cities in those countries. We will continue to foster those relationships and really help the economy grow in those ways as well internationally. And lastly, tourism. We have not at the city really had a robust tourism program, and so that's something that we are beginning with council's support and the Lodging Tax Committee support starting next year. So we will have our first official tourism program, and that we hope to expand in the next years. So I believe we are not taking questions at this time, which would mean that we have the next chapter. Is that correct? Which would be housing. Thank you.
Well, you know, it might be, if we had a question as we go, it would make, speed things up. Does anybody have any questions?
I have a question.
Go right ahead.
Thank you. On the Sister City chapter 4.5, what are we doing to coordinate with the sister cities on a yearly basis? Are there any trips planned? How are we supporting our sister city in the Ukraine? We never hear about that.
Yep.
What are we doing?
Sure. So what we have set up is we have set up twice a year conversations on kind of the director level with Korea and with Japan, so Hachinohe, Japan, and with Donghae, Korea. There was a change of leadership with Ukraine for the mayor, and so we just recently had a mayor-to-mayor call with the new mayor. I actually am now in email conversations with the new economic development director in Rivne, who is our newest sister city in Ukraine. So we are advancing those conversations and looking to also have regular Zoom meetings with them. So regular director meetings twice a year and department meetings, and then once a year or twice a year if needed, the Zoom meetings with the mayor to mayor. And those have all occurred with all of our countries since we last had our trip I guess it was last April. Yeah, so those, we've had 2 or 3 with Korea, 2 or 3 with Japan, and 1 or 2 with Ukraine.
So last year when you all went to Korea and Japan, I had done some research on what other sister city relationships are in the state of Washington with different cities around the state. And a lot of them, actually almost all of them, involve the community quite a lot in planning their sister city trips. And I'm hoping that eventually we can do that. I know that's how that got started years ago. That the community was pretty involved in the sister city trips, and I'd like to see that happen again. I think it would be very beneficial to our community, our businesses, our youth, and our schools to all have a part of being involved with our sister cities and supporting them and learning about them.
So we are pretty involved. There's been several cultural exchanges with the students already this year and last year. And then on the Korea side, the Korean American Association Economic Development is very involved with the Korean American Association, also with K Seattle, which is the Korean government small business ministry. So we have a very close community relationship with Korea. With Japan, we work with Encompass Japan, and they are the representatives for Hachinohe Japan in the U.S. So we have a couple of little I don't want to call them trade shows, but like little product showings that we've done with them. We've also had some kind of initial discussions with them about them being more involved in organizing and doing some more activities. And then on the Ukraine, we have a very close relationship with the honorary consul. And I've also met recently with the bishop of all the Ukrainian churches here in Washington State. And so they are very interested in also having exchanges with businesses and cultural exchanges. So we have a pretty good, deep building relationship with all 3 of our sister cities.
Council President.
So, Susan, I know what you're talking about. So maybe on a retreat under other, you could bring that up as a goal for the year, maybe to start a committee that would look into getting the Federal Way citizens involved. And I know Mark Freitas was very involved last time, and he probably would have a lot to offer. I know, this is just an idea.
Sure, I think that we need to get our wider community involved. I mean, as a council member, I had no idea you were doing these kind of things, so we don't hear about it as a council. And if we don't hear about it, the community's not hearing about it. So anyway, I'm glad it's happening. I just wish more people were involved in it. And so thank you very much. I appreciate you being here tonight.
Sure, thanks.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to chapter 5 now. Follow up to our last little discussion.
Can never talk too much about housing, right? Okay, so this is, you guys are going to see this chart. It's about the
We never
20th
talk
time
we
you've
always
seen
talk
this
about
chart.
this chart. This is, the grade 946 is like the highlight of our life.
Well, you guys know the 11,260 housing units, so when you can recite all of these by band, my job is done. So this is our housing need by income band. This is the first time ever that cities have had to consider households by income. Generally speaking, up until this point, through growth management, we had housing targets, but didn't have to kind of bifurcate it down to income bands. So this is a first. And so these are our housing numbers, and we had to do a land capacity analysis to show that we could accommodate all of these within our current zones within the city. This is, we just talked about this. I'm not going to spend any more time talking about this. This is permanent supportive housing and the fact that we need to do a code amendment, and we'll see where that goes. This is all repeat from previous. Okay, existing housing by type. So these are, right now we have 54% of our housing is single-family detached. That includes mobile homes. There's middle housing, which is up to 9 units, and then multifamily is at 20%. So this will potentially change. You know, what we have to do as part of House Bill 1110 is to look at allowing more middle housing within our city. And so, you know, in theory, you know, this will change the 25.5% category should get bigger over the next 20 years, and likely the single family will get smaller, if I had to guess.
Ask a question.
Yeah, sure.
If somebody puts an ADU in the back of their house, which is middle housing, could be, does that mean that on that graph right there, that would turn that lot or that property into one of the middle housing units of 9 or up to 9? So you had 1, now you have 2, and it changes the...
Yes. Yes.
Even, okay.
So part of the conversation that we will have about ADUs is, and this gets back to, you know, the night we talked about electric fences and why we've got so many other things stacked up before that. One of the things is looking at unit lot subdivisions, so right now, if you put your ADU, your accessory dwelling unit in your backyard, it's intended for family, you could potentially rent it out, but you have to live in one of the two, either the main house or the ADU. That's potentially changing, and you know, as we allow somebody to then create a miniature lot in their backyard, you could then potentially sell that accessory dwelling unit as an ownership product. And so that's going to change a lot of things, but those are conversations we will have over the next 6 months.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
It'll be so much fun to have. All right, you guys have seen this graphic before. I think most of you went to a middle housing conference at one point. Income and affordability. So right now, this is a breakdown of Federal Way, household income by AMI levels. We talked a little bit about that 0 to 30%. That is the orange within this graph, which is 18.7%. We have the next level up is very low income, 30 to 50% AMI. We're at 17%. Low income, 50 to 80%. And that is likely that Redondo Heights project that we talked about earlier falls in this green band. Moderate income is at 12%. That's 80 to 100% AMI. And then above median income, which is more than 100%, right now we're at 35.3. And if you recall back to that bar chart, we need housing at every income band. So all of these, so this pie chart could be exactly the same 20 years from now, or it could be dramatically different because we need a lot of housing, and we need a lot of housing at all affordability levels. So displacement, this is the thing, we talked about it a little bit with businesses as it related to the Sound Transit, TDLE, and a particular contractor who was concerned that their business was getting relocated or displaced by future transit. This graphic, this map was produced by Puget Sound Regional Council, and it basically uses census tract information to identify what portions of the city are at highest risk for displacement. So within these kind of darker, I'm going to call it orange, areas are lowest income. They are people that if they lost their housing, there might not be another choice for them in our city. And that's all this graphic is really intending to show, is that we have some areas that are at high risk. So the goals and policy focus for the chapter, we need, I'm going to keep beating the diversity drum, is we need everything. We need home ownership opportunities. We need to focus on growth. We did some stuff with our zoning code last year related to trying to improve housing production. We need to work with regional partners. So right now we're a member of SCIP. If I need to unpack that, let me know. We're looking at inclusivity, preservation of existing affordable homes within our city. A lot of our more affordable housing is older housing stock, which tends to then get bulldozed and replaced with something more expensive. We talked about displacement a little bit earlier. Diversity of housing. So right now we talked about a lack of missing middle housing. So this is getting more duplexes, triplexes, potentially double ADUs in backyards. You know, this is creating more housing and making it look a lot different than it is now. Working on affordability, and then trying to improve on equity of housing within our community. That's really the focus of this chapter. And that's the end. I don't know if we're doing questions.
Why don't we, so we can get them out of the way?
Let's do that.
Daniel?
First of all, Keith, I appreciate you shooting the email back. I do ask a lot of questions for educational purposes
Yes,
most
sir.
of the time. Of most of the ones you gave back, I agree with you on most of them. I'm a big fan of the diversity factor of the housing to make sure we have that middle. I am all about that one. The issue I have with this chapter is some of the verbiage that's in it. My biggest problem is when it says past discriminatory housing or land use and practices. I requested what the city has done, our city, not the general world or US in the past. And the only one I got was that we at one time were asking for a $22,000 impact fee for multifamily houses. My biggest thing is the verbiage that goes in this stuff sticks around for 20 years. And when I read this without knowing the history, without asking those questions, it makes it sound like the city of Federal Way was discriminating with its policies and practices and procedures. And that is an issue to me. I don't want that in here if we didn't do it. If we did it, I don't mind owning up and changing it. But if we didn't, I don't want it in there.
So the question is who are we? If we are the residents of Federal Way, the answer is yes, absolutely. There are subdivisions in this city where there are covenants in the HOA that say only white people can live in this neighborhood.
Still in existence to this moment.
Yeah, because we don't have any control over those covenants. So there's things that have happened. There's been redlining in zoning. So that happened with King County, because we've only been a city for 34 years, right? Our history, if we want to say us as the city of Federal Way, our history is very narrow in terms of how long we've been around in Copeville. But the question is Are we responsible for what happened in King County? Do we, and the question is I think we're just recognizing that these things have happened in King County in what's now called Federal Way in the past. What have we done personally? I identified the high school impact fees as basically a de facto moratorium on apartments. I don't know that that was done purposely by the council. I'm not going to criticize. I'm just saying that was the outcome that happened. There are things that have caused disparities within our community related to housing, and I think to not recognize that, I think does a disservice to the history that is here now. I don't think we have to say we did it personally.
But that's what the book says, though. City of Federal Comprehensive Plan, and then it states in here, like I said, if I read this, just reading this, I would have assumed that your department at some time since we've been a city has done this discriminatory stuff. And that would be an irritant to me, but if it isn't, then that's where I understand what you're saying, but again, I only take responsibility for the city of Federal since it started, in my mind. That's my 2 cents on that particular item.
I hear you.
Thank you. I had nothing else. Thank you, though.
I have a question, if possible.
We don't see you on the screen, so go
Sorry.
right ahead.
Okay. So, Keith, nationally, is Federal Way looking like cities around the country, or are we looking with our housing and our population, do we look different than the cities around the country?
I think that housing demand, the supply and demand is significantly out of balance in Western Washington. I think you could look to other parts of the country and it's probably not as bad, although my understanding is nationally, there's a housing crisis nationally. When I went to the National American Planning Association conference in Minneapolis, there were legislators from multiple states talking about how they're working on legislation to try to improve the housing supply in our country. So my guess is that that's a commonality. In terms of like redlining, I don't know if you were aiming at that, Councilmember Honda. In terms of like zoning and redlining particular races, that happened across the country. My guess is there were certain states that were worse than others, but it did happen here. I don't know that we are more egregious than other places. My guess is probably less so, but I think we have similar, I think everybody's working on the same housing problems nationally.
So when I look at, there's a chapter in here, I can't find it right now, that talks about seniors wanting smaller homes.
Yes.
Isn't that the trend across the country, though, that more people are wanting homes that are smaller than homes that are larger?
So I think it's because it's hitting kind of both bookends of the demographic population. So you've got the older folks that are wanting single-story, kind of the bungalow is the ideal housing typology for a lot of families. Single-story, maybe 2 to 3 bedroom, 1 bath, things that were built in the 60s across a lot of the country don't exist much anymore. And likewise for young families that can't afford maybe the median home price in most communities, something smaller that they can call a starter home. So kind of an ending home and a starter home, I think both of those are what people are looking for. And the problem is that's not where the most profit is. So no builder's going to build that. They're going to build the biggest thing possible on the lot because they're looking to maximize their profit.
But isn't that changing a little bit with the zoning where you can put 5 houses on a lot? It should make the economies of scale such that you don't have to build big to make as much profit.
So we have a new experiment, right? So this will, this will be, it will be interesting to see. If I can buy a 5,000 square foot lot today in Federal Way, I can put one house on it. You know, maybe 6 months from now, I might be able to put 4 residential units on it. And can I get more profit by building smaller, maybe lower entry point priced units than one single big house? That's what I think we're waiting to see.
But don't we control if you can put 1 or 4? The state came out with you can do 6, right?
Well, we're 4 or 6.
4 or 6, so.
There's transit plays and affordable housing plays a part of that. We haven't even had those policy questions with you guys yet, those conversations. I think we're pointed in one direction, but you guys might say, you know what, just make it 6 everywhere. We can do that.
It's 5 plus 1 affordable if you do 6, right?
It's basically 4 plus 2 if you're within a certain proximity to transit stops, or 4 plus 2 if the 2 are affordable.
Okay. I thought it was 5 plus 1, but 4 plus 2?
I think it's 4 plus 2, that's right.
It's 4 plus 2.
4 plus 2, 2 options of 4 plus 2, essentially.
I have another question, if that's okay.
You're okay.
So as we build housing and we take away more yards to put in more housing, we're going to need more park space. So as a city, how are we addressing that? I know that we've approved 2 new parks, but long-term, over the next 20 to 50 years, we probably really need to look at our park space and decide how we're going to manage that to meet the needs of the community if we're going to allow ADUs to take away yard space and that kind of stuff. It's a concern of mine because, that's a health issue too. You need space for kids to play, you need space for, people to be outside doing the things that they can only do outside, that are healthy and exercise, so it's just a concern.
And I think it's a valid one, and I don't think we have an answer for you tonight, council member. I know that, so each one of those units will have to pay a park impact fee. So it's good that we have adopted that. So that will put money into, parks coffers to hopefully build more public parks, because that's where those folks are gonna go to get their outdoor time. But what we don't know is right now we have an open space requirement per unit in our code. And the question is, because to your point, if you're going to put 4 residential units in your backyard, there's not room for open space most likely. And so if there's an open space requirement, how are they satisfying that? And I don't have an answer for you today on that. And I know we need to talk through that and bring you guys some choices on that front. But it's, there will be park impact fees paid, but then from an open space perspective, not sure what we're doing yet.
Yeah, just to off the top of my head, think of one potential option. Fee in lieu of open space is obviously a tool that's frequently used. So even for developments where there's no ability to physically place open space on the development, like 4 units on a small lot, you could still have them pay a fee in lieu of that open space requirement, which could be used by parks for various purposes, including.
But aren't we assessing $2,000 a door now?
Absolutely, and
this council did deal with that.
No question. I actually turned my microphone on to say that exact same thing, which is, and I think Keith said it as well, which is part of that has already been addressed by council recently with the adoption of the park impact fee. Each one of those units is going to be required to pay that. That's going to fund future parks.
If we get 11,000 new housing units times 2,000, it's a bigger number than it was before.
Yeah.
But we're going to have the space to have the parks and the open space.
Well,
and the trails and whatever else we need.
You can propose an ordinance like we did for Celebration Park and let the people vote on it. If that's really something we need to do.
Probably requires a future discussion.
Okay, maybe that goes in a meeting.
Parking lot.
Yeah, our parking lot.
I got one follow-up.
Yeah, Mr. Daniel.
I'm blown away. Keith, I got one.
Oh, sorry.
No problem, but I'm still blown away. Can you send me the list of the subdivisions that have that covenant or any HOAs? I'm blown away, man. I gotta check this out. Thank you.
Thank you. I was going to write an email asking for that, but
Oh,
could you send that to all of us?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The sad thing is Cheney did all that work, and she's obviously no longer here, so
I go to
I'm gonna,
Berrien all
I'm
the
gonna look
time.
through files and see what I can find. But yes, absolutely, we will send you that, because I know it exists. I've
And
seen it.
just an unsolicited piece of free legal advice for HOAs around the city, which is there's a very easy process under state law to erase and scrub and amend your bylaws, your CCNRs, in order to get rid of those things. The legislature's made it much easier to do that recently. So obviously that could be something that people need to consider.
Do you mind emailing me a link to that information?
Sure thing.
Thank you.
Well, please include everyone because I think it's something we all need to know.
Sure, will do.
Thank you.
Should we move on to capital facilities, or do you have more to go over?
No, we're on capital facilities.
Oh, good.
So capital facilities, they are major assets provided by public entities and for public purposes and services. They include things like surface water facilities, facilities for parks, transportation, government offices, public schools, water, sewer, fire, and law enforcement. So highlights of the chapter updates to the capital facilities chapter. There was a refresh and clarification of background information and statistics. There was additional information added about new capital facilities. For example, the new joint maintenance facility is addressed in the chapter, as well as additional space needs with regard to City Hall and with regard to the police department and others. There's a table outlining those. It reframes how external plans are referenced. So probably more than any other chapter, this chapter references a lot of outside plans and policies. And so there's a more streamlined way for how those are referred to. Also, it's done in a way where when those outside plans are amended in the future, it doesn't necessarily, or it will not trigger a comp plan amendment process, which can be quite burdensome. So just a slight language change has eliminated probably the volume of future comp plan amendments we'll see. It adds a chapter vision statement, just like all of our chapters have. It's updated goals, policies consistent with the city vision, as well as consistent with state, regional, and county requirements. And it also consolidates and it removes maps. So right now in the chapter, there are 11 maps, and that's consolidated down to 3. The chapter update included outreach and information provided from 16 different public entities, all listed here, entities as well as special districts. And these are the maps, the 3 maps that remain in the chapter. There was a refresh of the city facilities map, as well as the surface water trunk system. And then rather than having 4 separate maps showing our different water and sewer providers, those are all consolidated now under 1 map. That was.
I have a question. On page, 6.7, school facilities, that were above there, that you have a table that says XX.
Are you looking at the track changed version?
Well, I think I'm on the right place. It's, you got the graph of all the, City Hall, police evidence, you got all the buildings we own. Am I on the right page? I don't know, let's see a page number here. Make sure I'm on the right place. Yeah, capital facilities, and it's just 6.6.
Oh, so I think the binder version that you have,
Yeah.
I believe was provided back when we were taking this through Planning Commission.
Okay.
So XX references,
Okay,
things
got
like
it.
that
Well,
have been
anyway,
updated since then.
I think we got I don't think 2030 City Hall, 120,000 square feet and $100 million. I mean, that's 5 years from now, and we haven't even had any of those. I mean, we've had a lot of discussions, but it's really not, to me, it's really on a back burner. And if, like what Mr. McDaniel talked about, when we put something in a book, it becomes the thing that we're working towards. I can't see us putting in our comp plan in 2030, we're building a new city hall. That's pretty assumptive. I mean, we'd have to be voting on it today to even get to that year. So, I mean, you might have 2050, but I have a hard time with putting 2030 in the comp plan that we're going to do that.
2035.
I don't even think it'd be, anyway.
I think it is worth noting, I believe the capital facilities chapter is one of the chapters that can be updated with a greater frequency than others when it's done alongside a city budget amendment. So it's quite common for, as information changes and on a shorter time frame than 20 years, that the capital facilities chapter, the GMA provides more flexibility. That's why this chapter was amended last year, for instance, with regard to the park impact fee.
Okay, well, just my point is 2030 to me is like tomorrow. And it's, I don't see it. Anyway, we haven't, go ahead, Councilman Walsh.
With that said, could we simply change it to 2035?
Yes.
2040.
Yes.
That's been noted, that change can be reflected in the version we bring to first read, if that's.
Any other questions? Okay. Chapter 7, city centers, right? Or,
Yes. Lucy Sloman, Special Projects Planner, good evening. Here to talk about centers. In terms of the highlights of the changes, of course, with this periodic update, consistency with state and regional requirements and criteria is the baseline. The 2015 Comprehensive Plan, Chapter 7, was called City Center, which was focused on the regional growth center, basically as a sub-area plan. So we've now pulled that sub-area plan out to be just a sub-area plan, separate from the comprehensive plan, so there's no red line of this chapter. The 2024 Comprehensive Plan, Chapter 7, is focused on centers. So it includes a general centers framework, which I'll describe in a minute, as well as specific sections on the regional growth center and the countywide growth center. Each growth center section provides specific housing and job forecasts and planning unique to that center. And we've carried forward certain goals, policies, and implementation actions from the sub-area plans. Now to look at those in a little more detail. The two growth centers, which are shown in orange on this map, are focused around light rail stations. The Regional Growth Center is one of many within the Puget Sound region. The Countywide Growth Center is one of several within King County. Even though we talk about this from a growth center perspective, the context of those growth centers are included in this plan, meaning we aren't just limited to the orange area, but the relevant area around it. Each of those centers are planned to be vibrant, transit-oriented development centers. They will be the densest areas in Federal Way, accommodating most of the growth for the next 20 years in urban-style development. Because there are many shared traits, we have this general section that includes 4 goals and 36 policies that capture the commonalities between the centers and reduce duplication. So now I'm going to focus on each of the growth centers. First, the Regional Growth Center. It has 5 components. Two of the components are the Regional Growth Center, which is shown in the green outline, and then the dashed outline shows a proposed expansion area. It's an area that we consider an integral part of the Regional Growth Center, but is not currently the officially part of it, and will propose to the PSRC that be included next year. To implement the Regional Growth Center, we have zoning, and this zoning is all in place. Blue is the city center core, which equals the Regional Growth Center and its expansion area. We have the city center frame, which is the transition from the core to the surrounding neighborhoods, and the downtown overlay, which is additional standards such as architectural standards. This is going to be the primary center of the city. The policies, goals and policies we've put in place are intended to ensure that is the identifiable center. It's taking quite a bit of the population, residences, and jobs that we expect in the city over the next 20 years and will meet the required activity units. Next is the Countywide Growth Center. This is a relatively recent addition. It has three components. One is in the kind of orangey tan outline is the regional Countywide Growth Center. Then we have the South Station sub-area. This will be approved if you approve the sub-area plan, but the outline of the sub-area was approved, worked on through work with the stakeholder group. And then the TOD district is sort of our first phase within the sub-area and is where we expect the first changes. This is going to be the second transit-oriented development center in the city. It is intended to complement the Regional Growth Center using similar but lower intensity regulations. And it has, as I mentioned, that these centers will take the bulk of growth. So this center will have a substantial amount, but maybe like a third to a quarter of the growth that the Regional Growth Center is expecting. And again, it meets the activity units. Lastly, although we're talking to you later this week about the South Station sub-area plan and its remand, we just wanted you to know that two of the policies in the comp plan have been updated based on council comments. One is to recognize that possible zoning changes will not require a business to move if those go through. And second, we made edits to implement mitigation and minimizing sound transit impacts on businesses. And that would be my presentation, and I'm ready for questions if you have some.
Councilmember Daniel?
I'll check those out later, but thanks for the change. I'll look at it. I just want to make a positive comment, actually. You guys have one of the coolest goals in here. It's on C16, and it's make the city center an inclusive hub for community gathering, local entrepreneurship, and cultural celebrations to promote civic pride and foster a strong sense of identity and belonging among residents, businesses, and visitors in the city's hub. I just want to let you guys know I love that one. It's one of my favorite ones in the book. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a
I
question.
have sorry.
I'll go first, you can go second.
Okay,
Susan.
sure.
Last time we had this discussion, we had the business come forward. I'm assuming we've had meetings with them and they're on base with this now?
Yes, that was the sub-area
Right.
plan. This is the comprehensive
Right,
plan.
but they
They're
all-
obviously
they go
very
together.
much related.
Yeah.
Yes, there were meetings with them. I think a lot of their concerns were around Sound Transit and Sound Transit's actions, which is exactly why we've edited these policies, both in response to their comments and council comments. And so I think that they're comfortable. My understanding is they're comfortable.
And I guess I have one last question, then Susan, you can jump in there. Can the sub-area zone or the second place, can that be denser? I mean, could we, if we're going to do it, which we are probably going to, can't we make it a little more dense?
You mean not
You know, instead of
necessarily
saying- yeah.
less than the regional growth center?
Yeah, instead of 3,000 people or whatever, could it be 6? Or, I mean, are we limiting ourselves by saying a much smaller number?
Well, I don't think the intent is to limit. I think that the zoning that implements this, which is one of the implementation actions, is a great place to talk about how much. I don't think the intent is to limit growth. I think the intent is to show that we have the capability of accommodating the growth that we have been assigned to take. And we're showing how that could come in. But it could be much more in one area than another area if that's the way the city develops or the implementing zoning changes allow.
But it does come back down to what Councilmember McDaniel says, when you put it in writing, that's usually where you end up or could end up. I mean, I don't know, it just seems like we might want to have a higher target numbers down there.
Just a couple comments on that. First, those numbers are just coming from the projected numbers of what the data is assuming is going to locate there. There's nothing that prevents us, all we have to do is accommodate at least that number, right, generally. There's nothing that would prevent us from accommodating way more than that. So we can absolutely, through future actual zoning changes that implement this down the road, absolutely allow for or considerably more dense development.
And one other thing I would add, I would be hesitant as part of the comp plan to change the numbers that are shown there. One, because I agree with Deputy Attorney that we can take more. But right now, I believe these projections are an outgrowth of the transportation analysis. So the circulation chapter, the land use chapter, the centers chapter are all very interrelated right now. And so I don't think we're trying to put a damper on it. We're just trying to make sure all those pieces fit together.
Councilmember Honda,
Hi.
your turn.
Thank you. So when I think of Federal Way, I think of Federal Way from corner to corner, and I don't think of it as just the downtown area. And so when I heard you say that this area is going to be the center of Federal Way, and I read where we want all sorts of things to happen here and to be committed to this area. Would it not be more, wouldn't it be better for our city to have things spread out throughout Federal Way so we don't have so much congestion with traffic and other things in this small area downtown, where we could have businesses in maybe the Twin Lakes area, the Dash Point area, up north? I mean, we really need to do something up north to make that more business friendly, in my opinion. Does that not make more sense? It just seems that it's a very small area to call it the center of Federal Way.
This is, so, good question, Councilmember Honda, and I'm not sure there's an exact answer. I think there's probably going to be opinions on what's the best way for us to chart a path forward. I'll give you an example from the city I live in. So there's a reason why downtown Bellevue looks like it does and Factoria looks like it does. There was a conscious decision made to focus the development in downtown Bellevue and at the expense of Factoria. Factoria is in actually a better location, being at the intersection of 405 and 90. But you had an influential Bellevueanite, Kemper Freeman, and the government of the city just made some decisions about focusing stuff in its downtown, and right now its downtown is doing very well. I think that one of the reasons why we talked about kind of chopping up our city center into a downtown and kind of an edge is to look at it on a finer grain of detail, because if you look at too big of an area, then it's really, it's kind of like spreading peanut butter. It's all the same color, it's all the same texture over the whole thing, and there's nothing special. And I think that there's some value to basically segregating off a piece of the city and saying, you know what, let's put this under a different lens and treat it a little bit differently. And then the rest of the city can understand that is the place where they should go for community events and things of that sort. It doesn't mean that those things won't happen elsewhere in the city. They just want to focus potentially around, you know, our city center and our downtown station. So that's kind of the philosophy we've taken. And is it the right philosophy? It may very well not be. I think it has worked in other cities, and I think that's why we would maybe suggest it and that we stay the course in Federal Way. So that's my 2 cents for whatever that's worth.
I have a penny to add. Along the lines of what Keith's saying, I don't think that this means that things will not happen in other neighborhoods. But most communities want to know where their center is. And I don't know whether this is the best example, but it's the one that comes to mind. When 9/11 happened, I live in Seattle. When 9/11 happened, the city had to decide where could we all gather to mourn and acknowledge this together. And that was Seattle Center because it was the only place that had room. Now, that's a massive event. And there's some places in downtown Seattle where they've been able to hold rallies for particular events. It's something that when the city wants to gather or wants to focus energy or focus for certain activities, that there is a place and people know where that is. And so I think you bring up a really important point, Councilmember Honda, that it's not to the exclusion of other neighborhoods, because neighborhoods have their own character and people are invested in those as well. It's kind of a Venn diagram, both happening.
All right, thank you.
Councilmember Daniel?
Yeah, just real quick, I'm just gonna add a little insight to the council. I know the city's talked to some of the landowners down there, but I can tell you right now, they have not talked to their tenants. So the big fish knows, little fish does not know. So as we move through this process, I'll let you know what little fish find out.
Thank you. Okay, we go on to natural environment, excuse me.
All right, so this is one of the chapters. We added a number of chapters through this periodic update, and a number of chapters we kind of completely redid. This is one of those chapters that we just took a very light touch to update, but generally keep predominantly the same as it was in the 2015 version. So the highlights, we did format changes to the chapter to make it consistent with the other chapters. We added a vision statement consistent with other chapters. The tree preservation and air quality were part of this chapter in the 2015 version. But since we added a climate and resiliency chapter, we decided to move it there, that it made more sense under climate and resiliency. And given that we were adding a parks and recreation chapter, the open space section was seen as duplicative and was moved there as well. So those are the main updates to this chapter. One of the things that we did and we talked about extensively was making a stronger connection to our commitment to RIA 9. I think that right now we've added some goals and policies related to the water resource inventory area as we are part of RIA 9. That's it.
Okay, let's go to the next one. I don't see any questions. I look towards you because I know you've got lots of marks and you've read a lot of this, like everyone else.
So Chapter 9 is utilities. And similar to what Keith mentioned about natural environment, this was kind of one of those lighter touch update chapters. This addresses all the utilities you see here: telecommunication, electric, natural gas. It briefly references water and sewer utilities, but those are actually addressed in our capital facilities chapter. And then also waste management. Highlights, refreshes background information and statistics. There's information about new utilities planning, both from King County, PSE, but also there's a reference now to our broadband planning that occurred last year, and there's actually an implementing action item specific to the broadband planning study that was done in 2023. It removes or simplifies unnecessary information, reframes how external plans are referenced, just like we've done with the capital facilities chapter. There's a chapter vision statement, updated goals and policies consistent with that vision statement, as well as state, regional, and county requirements for utilities. There was a PSC map that was in the 2015 chapter that we've removed. Utility maps are updated with such great frequency that it doesn't make sense to have like a standalone PSC map exist in a 20-year comp plan. And we've added, as I mentioned, information about broadband planning by the city. So those are the updates.
Can I make a comment on your page PU8, talks about existing wireless systems? Sprint's no longer in business, so we might want to take that out.
Thank you.
And on your graph there, you had Clearwire and one other, Singular, and both of those are no longer available.
We'll do a final refresh of all of the utilities that keep
Okay.
gobbling each other up.
Thank you. Shoreline.
Those might be changing yearly. Yes, we're going to stay on this roll of chapters that we took a light touch to. So we just updated our shoreline regulations in 2019. So the chapter itself did not need a whole lot of updates. So the update highlights, again, formatting the changes to the chapter to be consistent with other chapters. We proposed changes to the goals and policies, and those have been identified in the staff memo. There's a new vision statement to match the other chapters, and we included a new map in the chapter. And that, this is not the new map, this is the one that's in there now. This identifies those places in Federal Way and our potential annexation areas. So the areas that are in the kind of the candy stripe red and white, those are not in the current limits of the city, but they are our identified potential annexation areas. So the yellow is Federal Way, and you can see Steel Lake and North Lake are regulated shorelines, but lakes like Mirror Lake and Lake Lorraine and some of the others are not. And then obviously the Puget Sound shoreline is regulated shoreline. And basically what it means is there's a separate set of rules for properties that are within those jurisdictions. It gets very difficult to do things like, for example, replace a bulkhead because the state has determined that bulkheads are not good for fish and aquatic wildlife. So those are things that are regulations, and we're basically authorized to implement those regulations that come down from the state. So this is the new map. This is our shellfish protection area. And I thought this was important to include in this chapter. It includes, obviously, we're looking at the Puget Sound shoreline, and there are areas where you can dig for clams and other shellfish, and there are areas that you cannot. The red zone is the area that's prohibited. Green is good, and yellow, it depends on the day and the way the pollution happens to be moving. So that is that.
So I had one question again.
Yes.
So you have on SPM 3, you have Steel Lake, North Lake, Shore Lake, Kearney, and North Lake. Those are regulated shorelines, and Twin Lakes like Lake Jean, those are not regulated, that's why they're not in here, like Mirror Lake and things like that?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
On historic and cultural resources, it talks about the significance of that the city will protect known buildings and sites that have historic, cultural, and I can't even say the word, significance, and that the city will provide guidance to property owners of these areas to facilitate opportunities for recognition and remembrance in the community. Do you have a list of those sites and buildings that the city's going to try to protect?
Can I answer that question after I make the presentation on arts, culture, and historic preservation?
You're one chapter ahead.
You're one chapter ahead of us, council member.
Actually,
No, this is in the shoreline.
Is it in shoreline?
It is. It's a brief chapter or a brief
Yeah.
section in shoreline that references it.
10.2.3.
Yep.
10.2.3. So your question was, do we have a list of those structures?
Yep, and sites that the city is going to protect and work with the property owners.
I'm going to guess with you, we have a partial list. So there is going to be some structures that are probably not on any list that we have. But as they come in, if they were to come in, for example, to do a restoration within a regulated shoreline, that's when the city would work with them to try and keep whatever historic, characters of that existing structure intact as they went through their rebuild. So we don't have kind of mandatory historic zones within the city. And so this is ultimately trying to recognize that there are historic structures within these regulated shorelines. And if they were to come in for any kind of remodel, rebuild, that the city should work with them to preserve the character of the existing structure.
And there's
I
also,
imagine, oh, I'm sorry.
oh, go ahead.
I imagine around Steel Lake that there are historic structures
Sure.
that we might want to encourage the owners to protect and, and take care of. Because that was one of the first places people came to Homestead and to, when they came to this area.
Yeah, and the only thing I was going to add was to say that in our code, so this is not in our comprehensive plan, but it's actually in our development code itself, we require archaeological site investigations for sites that are basically rated as moderate to high likelihood of finding archaeological or historic items there, based off of a predictive model that the Washington State Department of Ecology and Historic Preservation does. So part of our part of the protection is driven by a model at DAP, essentially.
Does that include the lakes, areas around lakes?
It does. It includes all areas, basically all areas of the city. And I don't know exactly how those areas of lakes are classified under that model, but as you said, they likely would be some of the areas with the higher rates that might trigger that requirement to do that archaeological study or site investigation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, awkwardly now I will start arts, culture, and historic preservation. My apologies, Councilmember Honda. You were more in tune than I was. So this is a brand-new chapter. And working on this chapter, we really wanted to reach out to community organizations to kind of get us on the right track. And so there were a number of meetings with the Arts Commission, a number of meetings with the Historical Society. We held 3 community-wide events, documents that were reviewed, Alive in the Arts, City of Federal Way Community Cultural Plan, Historical Society of Federal Way Strategic Plan. We also researched sample chapters from City of Edmonds, City of Seattle, City of Gig Harbor, and Washington, D.C. And then we also looked at APA arts and culture briefing papers. Again, all to try and get this first draft of this new chapter off in the right direction. The overarching chapter goals, enhance the way people experience Federal Way, build a sense of belonging and community identity for such a young city. I think recognizing that we have history and have history worth saving is important. Bring people together and promote a strong sense of community. And that is summary of the arts, culture, and historic preservation chapter.
Councilmember McDaniel?
Yeah, I'm just gonna make a comment. If you guys haven't read the introduction on that one, the introduction is another solid paragraph of like good information.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go to Chapter 12, Community Services.
Good evening, Council. Chris Greer, Community Services Manager, Human Services Department. And please excuse me as I try to be as clear as possible, because unfortunately, this is what happens when you have a 9-year-old who likes to spread their germs and get in your face without permission. So.
Yeah, I'm suffering from the same thing after grandkids.
Exactly, exactly. So please forgive me. So community services, to give you some background. DEI, which is diversity, equity, access, and inclusion. We have 2 points that are important here. Number one, you want to be in compliance, which is having systems with policies focused on equity, reducing discrimination and harassment, as well as having community partnerships with providers who are also executing those same practices, which are very important. And then number 2, you want to be engaging in good practice. DEAI focuses on transparency, accountability, and eliminating barriers. for those with disabilities. But as we also know, these principles overall are about supporting and giving everyone fair opportunities. Now, of course, we include DEI overall processes and principles in the work that we do, because these are important, because we want to make sure that we're being equitable and having fairness for all, regardless of race, color, creed, sex, gender, and socioeconomic status. Community needs assessment for grant making. Social service planning and access for residents. Just to give you context, the community needs assessment aids in supporting our social service planning and grant funding recommendations for the Human Services General Funds. To drive this assessment, we gather current and ongoing statistical and demographic data from the King County government, the Census Bureau, and information from the Federal Way Consolidated Plan. Next, social service goals. Now, the overall goals of community services are to reduce poverty and to increase self-sufficiency and well-being. So in general, our strategies and planning are geared towards addressing basic needs, unmet needs, safety, and bringing opportunity to everyone, especially those who are low income, marginalized, impoverished, disadvantaged, and underserved. And as you see from the bullet points here, of course, we want to definitely make sure we address basic needs. We want to reduce poverty, and making sure that we address unmet needs is very important, along with our strategic planning and partnerships that we have in Federal Way with our partners. And lastly, grant-making goals. Our grant-making goals are comprised of a number of elements. In point summary, we want to, number one, display good ethics while exhibiting high standards in our grantee selection process and partnerships. Number two, we want to partner with community resources to meet and improve the needs of residents. And number three, be strategic and purposeful with our CDBG and Human Service General Funds, along with supporting new and existing programs who bring services and opportunities to local residents. So I know one of the goals as the Community Services Manager here is to make sure that we diversify our portfolio of community partners to not only bring services to our Federal Way residents, but to improve and increase the amount of providers that are actually in Federal Way to support our community. And I think that's it. Not sure if there's any questions.
I have one question.
Yes, sir.
In this chapter where it talks about income, and it talks about Federal Way has a medium income of $97,411, and the rest of King County is at $164,768. Is that skewed because of the concentration around Microsoft and the Bellevue and the tech areas, or, I mean, it's kind of, I'm just curious how, that's what it seems logical to me, but I don't know, so that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, when you think about it, a lot of the high salary jobs are in King County, are in Northern King County and in Seattle. So when you have Microsoft there, when you have Amazon there, so naturally those numbers will be skewed and there will be a disparity. So
Yeah.
yes.
So if there was a map that showed the spike of what the average is around Amazon, let's say, and around Microsoft, it would be really 250 or 3 or something. I mean, it would look really different than just those two numbers, I would think, right?
No, you're actually correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
I have a question on aging.
Yeah, go ahead, Susan.
I work with the Senior Commission, and one of their items that we talk about quite frequently is a senior center. And I would just tell you that my goal in Federal Way is to have multiple small senior centers around the neighborhoods so that seniors can walk to their senior center and not have to get on to some form of transportation to get to a very large senior center. But saying that, you know, there isn't a standalone senior center in Federal Way, and while it may be an unpopular thing to say, I would support our aging community and providing services for them in senior centers around the city. Thank you.
Comment is noted.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Get better.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Lots of vitamin C, right? Okay, Chapter 13, Climate and Change resiliency?
So work on the climate change and resiliency chapter began in early 2023, and at that time, under the GMA, it was an optional chapter. House Bill 1181 changed that, and by 2029, we will be required to have this chapter. So we are hopefully ahead of the curve. Just to highlight components of the chapter, it presents results of a greenhouse gas study, a consultant-led study that was fully grant-funded, that was conducted last year. And then it lays out greenhouse gas mitigation focus areas of reducing automobile dependency, preserving and expanding tree density, and around building energy conservation, renewables use, and waste reduction. And then the second half of the chapter is a hazard resiliency framework, as well as an inventory of our natural hazards, and then vision, goals, and policies pertaining to both reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and becoming more resilient to hazards from climate change, as well as all natural and human-caused hazards. This is just a highlight from the greenhouse gas inventory. One thing to point out, this is, the red line is showing what our local emissions could be if we are on track to consistent with state greenhouse gas emission targets. Everything above the pink line is a decrease in our emissions that we would expect if all state and federal regulations around clean fuel standards with regard to utilities reducing their greenhouse gas emissions, if all of those go into effect, that alone will have a significant bite at our greenhouse gas emissions. But there's still an additional set of work that we can do as a city to ensure that our emissions are reduced even further than that. Of the three focus areas, the two on the left, automobile dependency and reducing emissions from buildings, those account for 4/5 of our city's emissions. Tree loss is only about 1% of our emissions. However, there's a lot of co-benefits with regard to tree preservation and planting, public health benefits, reducing urban heat island. That was also a topic that we heard a lot about during public outreach for our comp plan. Resiliency, so right now in this chapter, we've addressed hazard resiliency at sort of a higher level. Sometime next year, an effort being led by our emergency manager is adopting the city's first hazard mitigation plan, and that would then be incorporated by reference into this chapter. That will go into much greater detail on hazard resiliency. But in this chapter, we've addressed hazards such as earthquakes, landslides, severe weather, sea level rise, volcanoes, wildfires, et cetera. And those will be expanded on in the hazard mitigation plan that's currently being developed. And consistent with House Bill 1181, by 2029, we do expect there are some further updates we're going to have to make to this chapter. I think there's still further guidance from the state that's coming out on this, and who knows, there could be further legislative changes with regard to GMA requirements for climate change planning. But sometime in the next few years, we do expect a further update to this chapter to be compliant with state law. So, any questions on this chapter?
I don't see any, so let's keep moving.
All right.
Good evening, City Council members. Here to present the Parks and Recreation chapter, and I can tell you the Parks Department is elated because it's the first time we've had a Parks and Recreation chapter in our comp plan. And so the guiding document for the Parks Department is really the PROS plan, Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Plan. And a lot of parts in this chapter you're going to see referencing that, and that's because the PROS plan goes into much greater detail than the comprehensive plan requires. And so we want and need that detail in the Parks Department. And so the PROS plan development is guided by public input, city goals, state and national trends, and it reflects the values and aspirations of what our citizens want to see in our parks. The vision of Federal Way Parks and Recreation is to create a vibrant, interconnected community where parks and recreation spaces are accessible, inclusive, and sustainable. The plan envisions a future where residents of all ages and backgrounds can enjoy high-quality parks, trails, open spaces that foster active lifestyles, promote community gathering, and preserve natural beauty. A background on this is just a few short years ago, we were stuck in a global pandemic, and parks were really the only place people had to go. And unfortunately, I think some of those lessons are already being lost. And so, emerging from that pandemic, we had updated our PROS plan in 2019. And the world had just changed, short 3 years later. And so initially it wasn't determined whether or not there would be this chapter in the comp plan, but after a little bit of development, it was decided to put in there. But then at that time, we recognized our PRO plan was maybe a little bit out of date and it didn't reflect the values and what our community wanted. So at that point, we took a co-current track and actually for the past it's been about 16 months we've been working on a PROS plan update. We've been working on this comprehensive plan chapter, but also as a part of that PROS plan and comp chapter, two of our biggest parks were kind of at their threshold and needed to be master planned again. And so that's both Steel Lake Park and Brook Lake, which is a new development or new property. And so with our staffing levels, that's taken a little longer and been a little bit more intense process than we maybe anticipated, but it's good because it's reflecting what the community wants to see. And so a lot of this chapter is referenced to in the PROS plan, but it's our first time in the comp plan and it gives us a good starting point. It will meet all of the requirements, and so, provides estimates of parks and recreation demand for the next 10 years. It's an evaluation of our facility and service needs. The tree canopy coverage, which is a requirement of this chapter in the WAC, is being handled in the climate and resiliency chapter. And then an evaluation of how intergovernmentally we partner and provide regional approaches for parks, recreation, and open space planning. And with that being said, I would entertain any questions if we had any.
Seeing none, I guess we'll move on to the next.
Thank you.
Now do we move to the place where you're going to say we need a motion to move this forward?
Not yet. We have
Not
one
yet.
more.
One more.
One more. We're almost there.
I missed it then.
Yeah.
Oh,
All
the
right. So,
appendix.
so one more brand new thing for our comp plan. Our comp plan in the past, we did these updates, these periodic updates every 8 years. Went through a lot of work and then put this giant book on a shelf and didn't look at it again for another 8 years. And for me, that doesn't work. It's like, why would you spend so much time on something and not actually monitor it and work on implementing it? And so for the first time ever, we're including an implementation appendix in this update. So we've identified 65 items. It's pretty aggressive, but through all the chapters, and that doesn't include what parks will be working on and what public works staff will be working on in terms of transportation. I couldn't really reconcile the multiple departments, but 65 items that we're going to work on in the next 5 years. Items have been identified as falling either in the 1 to 2 year time frame or the 3 to 5 year time frame, and we're making a commitment that annually we're going to come to both the Planning Commission and the City Council, probably the LU Land Use and Transportation Committee, and give a presentation on the progress that we've made so that you guys can monitor that and see whether we're doing what you expect us to do or not. That is the end of implementation. Any questions on that?
I just have one. When I look at your appendix, you've got little check marks, 1 to 2 or 3 to 4.
Yes.
So it's right to assume the 1 to 2s will be showing up next year and the year after, and there'll be a time when we can prioritize and say maybe that one that's 4 should be a 1 to 2 and move them around.
Yeah, absolutely. The idea that I think we've talked about, that Holly and I have talked about, has been to, as we kick them off, we get them done, kick them off, we make space, then the idea is either the 3 to 5s move into the 1 to 2 year category, or we might decide that there's some things that we hadn't identified in those first 5 years that are a priority and we should work on. I think Councilmember McDaniel asked on one particular item, are you guys, how are you measuring this? And my answer back was, well, we haven't figured that out yet because it's not an implementation item, but if ultimately we decide that's super important and we should be doing that, then it's going to get on the updated list. But we'll update that list every year is the expectation.
So my question would be, we've heard, as we've gone through this, different things council members have asked for to be looking at.
Yes.
Heard about a all-inclusive park, and we've heard about what are we going to do with 4 houses, 6 houses, whatever. So is the process, the council, as we meet and go through our retreat and all that, we've evaluated this and say, wait, there's one other thing that we think is more important or as important, it should be in a 1 and 2 and direct it that way? Is that how?
Absolutely. That'd be great if you guys engage at that level.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, I don't have any other questions. Do I have a motion?
Well, I have a quick
I
question.
thought you were gonna go make a motion and say, hey, let's,
I'll make a motion right after the question.
We have 2 more slides to get through.
Oh,
This
okay.
is for, with all these different things in the comprehensive plan, covering a lot of the different areas of the responsibility of city government, one of the most important responsibilities of city government is public safety. Yet there's no public safety chapter. Yet that's one of the key things in city government.
There's not. There is, public safety is addressed in some of the other chapters. You will see specific goal and/or policy in, like, for example, the economic development chapter related to safety for businesses. We've heard that through the chamber, through a number of different outreach events, that our businesses are wanting their businesses to be safe. And so, creating a safe business climate is one of those things that shows up more in economic development and not in a standalone safety chapter. I think likewise, there's also some goals and/or policies in housing that talk about safe neighborhoods. So we've kind of spread it out a little bit, but you're right. That is not a required chapter through Growth Management Act, and I have not seen another city have a standalone safety chapter.
okay.
All right. So as we reach almost the end of our presentation this evening, I just want to point out the codified criteria for amending a comprehensive plan, which is found in the revised code 19.80.150. And it is on your slides. I'll just quickly summarize for you. So the proposed amendments need to have a substantial relationship to public health, safety, and/or welfare. They need to be in the best interest of the residents and be consistent with 3670A RCW, the Growth Management Act. And lastly, I know you're all excited to get to the last slide. The recommendation by the Planning Commission and the mayor is to adopt the ordinance as proposed this evening. Now, it is time.
Now it's Councilmember Walsh's turn.
I move to forward the proposed ordinance to first reading on November 19, 2024.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded after all these great presentations. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Thank you very much.
Okay, now we move to item 4. Is there anything else, any other thing anybody'd like to discuss? For next meeting is December 2nd at 5 PM, and we'll adjourn.